Thank you.
Are we ready?
We are ready.
So welcome to this November 12th School Board Work Session. Thank you for being here. And before we get started, I just want to say a special thank you to our staff who are here for every one of these work sessions to answer questions for us in helping us make the best possible choices for the school district. I know this is a big imposition on your day, so thank you so much for being here. Madam Superintendent?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item coming before you, speaking of one of our staff members who's gonna cut out the head up with Tallahassee, will be Ms. Dodge. She's gonna bring a policy update that's been revised for you.
Good afternoon.
Good
afternoon.
So, the policy before you this afternoon is a modification to our use of medications policy, where we have added language to comply with the state requirement that we have policies and procedures in place regarding allowing students who have prescriptions for medical marijuana to have that administered at school if necessary. Previously, the state, let me back up, the state has required us to have a draft to them by December 1st and to have an approved policy to them by December 31st. Previously, our policy advisor, Neola, because of the fact that this is a federal Schedule I drug that is illegal federally, but legal within the state, has advised us on 2 different occasions not to have a policy. And so, we didn't, based on their advice. But now the state has said you have to have this to them by a certain date, and we will withhold your funding if you do not.
Lovely.
And so we are with this policy, trying to walk the line with complying with the state requirement, not getting in trouble with the federal government and having those funds be in jeopardy, but making sure that students who need, who have prescriptions and need to have this at school are taken care of. And so the state supplied all the districts with some sample policies based on the information from our staff on how we were currently handling things. I tried to pull from those policies the things that were either common amongst all of them or reflected our way of work. And so the draft before you, I believe, is the best way of walking the line and still getting our kids what they need.
And before we take any questions, I was gonna say that Ms. Dodge, as she looked at the other districts, we're not an outlier. We're really in line with a lot of them, what they're doing currently within their district. So it's not like we're doing anything that's really outside of what everybody else is doing. So I wanted to make sure we point that out. Ms. Miller and Ms. Cunningham.
I know, thank you for explaining why we don't already have a policy, because this has been law for a long time, and we've had parents, we have medically fragile children who have seizures that are benefiting from this medication, and currently, before this policy was made, they would have to pick them up, transport them off the school campus to administer to bring them back to school. And so I was hoping we would have, but the state pushing us, they were pushing a lot of districts who did not have these policies ready by withholding money. I wish we could have done this earlier. So if, I know this is a rare incident because we have something that's contradicting federal and state law, but in the future, we had to have this to them now. I would have liked to have a little more discussion about it and hear from the families that are actually, there's not a lot of families in our district using this, but for the few that are, how it could benefit them. Or right now, you're right, it matches what the other districts are doing, but if you're a working family member and you're the one that's approved by the state to administer medication, and you cannot get off work to bring the medication, you're risking, whatever that medical condition is for the child. And that's, as an advocate, that's my only concern. And I understand we're following others. I know Washington and Florida are the 2 that left it up to the districts. There was a lawsuit that forced Illinois and a few other states to create, legislature create the parameters. So it's a little unfortunate that we're having to do it district by district. It would have been easier if we could have done this in Tallahassee 6 months ago. I appreciate your work on this. There is a concern from families that I've heard from of, the need to administer, and they have to work. And so we might hear more of that. And this is, you know, illegal. I don't want families, this was passed, this is nothing they're doing, and I don't want families to feel like they're, you know, having to do something that's against the law or undercover or against our policy or treated any differently than any other medication. But thanks for working on this, Wendy.
Ms. Cunningham?
I'm good, she covered it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Townsend?
I got a few things. One, I mean, I think sounds to me like Neola was being extremely obtuse and difficult in this, and if they're advising us to not have a policy, that's probably something that needs to be brought to the board immediately as a piece of advice. These are our policies, not Neola's policies. If federal law and state law are in conflict, we should say it in our policy. Federal law and state law are in conflict in our policy, thus we are setting this policy now. I'm fine with the if the feds threaten us, the revocation clause is fine. I don't have any problem with that. I think any other medication taken at school. So the way I read this, no school employee, no school district employee can administer it. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. Is that the same for all medications, or are we specifically singling out medical marijuana?
I don't know of any other medications where that happens, but I don't know of any other medications that are legal in the state and illegal at the federal levels.
Yeah, this is truly a different scenario from any other substance, to the extent that marijuana is not it's not a prescription drug. It is an herb that you get by recommendation. It's not a prescription drug. But what you have is a federal law that says we shouldn't be doing this in schools. Then you have a constitutional amendment in the state of Florida saying we're going to legalize marijuana for medical purposes, but not in schools. Then we have a law coming in saying we're going to have it in schools that conflicts with the constitutional provision. These three things do not play well together. So we are on the horns of a dilemma here. But no, to my knowledge, there is no other substance or medication that has these conflicting federal and state requirements associated with them, and that leads us so if bad facts make bad law. We've got one substance that we're dealing with this way because we've been led down this legislative path.
All right. So so other substances our employees can administer.
Prescription medications,
okay.
yes, absolutely.
So the reason we're excluding them is solely because of the legal conflict. If the legal conflict went away, if this was federal, state.
Well, there's more than one legal conflict. Number one, we've got the drug-free schools law that is still on the books. But number two, you've got nurses who have their license at jeopardy if they're administering drugs that their regulations say they can't do so. It puts them at risk. Yeah. It's both of those things.
The only thing that concerns me is
Yeah.
creating a stigma around the medicine just because of this stigma. As long as the prohibition on our folks doing
I
it
agree.
is
There
built around
should
the
not
conflict.
be any
Okay.
stigma associated with it. It's strictly a problem that is
Okay.
posed to us from the conflict of laws.
Okay.
But yeah, there should not be any stigma attached to that.
Ms. Miller?
I just, I appreciate you giving that background. I just want to be clear that in order to have this is medical cannabis, they have to be registered with the
Right.
state of Florida with an ID card. The person administering has to be registered with an ID card to the state of Florida. You have to have a doctor's letters to even get it. There's a process. I don't want the public to think that this is anything other than it is.
Yeah, absolutely not. But it is not a prescription medication.
Right.
It is not
Not
it
how
is not
prescriptions
a
currently
quote
read.
medicine for which a
Right.
prescription is written by a medical doctor.
And we have nurses that administer some really heavy medications to some of our most
Absolutely.
fragile kids that are the effects are much more, what they would have from those narcotic type drugs over this, but this is where we're gonna be. So as soon as, when there's change federally, if there's ever, or if things change, then we will update this policy as those come through.
Ms. Fortney?
I don't know if, I read this a couple times, but I'm just curious, Wendy, is there anything about our, staff that is under the same,
This policy is in the 5,000 sections, which is students only,
right?
and so there's nothing in here regarding employees.
Oh, we have
Right.
not received anything.
But I
about
meant
those.
anything like outside of the 5,000s of Neola.
No.
No,
This policy addresses students only. It
I
does not
understand.
address employees.
but we don't address the
Correct.
student, I mean, the staff that
We have not
Possibly.
received anything.
Correct.
have not,
Mhm.
okay. I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify.
Ms. Reynolds?
As we were talking about this in point 2, where it says no district employer contractor may administer, what happens when the student's parent is an employee of the school? Is there,
And they're a caregiver in
so
that
they,
situation.
okay,
Supersedes.
is that any,
They have
so
a
that just
card that
supersedes.
identifies them.
Okay.
We should,
And so the
Is that something that we need to have in there to clarify that that would supersede, or is,
I think so.
I just don't wanna end up,
We cer-
you know,
we
somebody
certainly
comes in
can.
as a teacher and
You're right.
says,
We
I
certainly
can't give
can.
it to my own student.
Yep.
We certainly
Yes.
can.
Um,
Yeah, the intent was not to ensnare a parent.
Right.
They would be administering it in their role as a parent, not as, in their role as an employee.
Good.
Any other questions? Okay,
All right,
thank you. Safe travels.
Yes, be safe.
Thank you.
Have fun.
Yeah.
Next items that will come before you will be coming out of our Human Resources Division by Ms. Porteous.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There are 2 positions that I'm bringing before you. Both of these positions are at a 0 cost and have been approved in the staffing plan earlier this year. The first is a senior analyst public relations. We're essentially changing some of the essential functions of the position. And the other is a senior coordinator in personnel, again, changing some of the duties and functions of the position. But both of these are a no-cost item to you today.
What I would like to note is that the senior analyst public records position, that was a change in reporting structure from PR to Ms. Dodge. One, we felt like it was going to be a more aligned with dealing with some of the things that Ms. Dodge deals with and communicating back and forth with policies and different things of that nature. So that was one, and then as she looked at the job description, there was some differences in duties that needed to be addressed within this job description. Any questions? Ms. Cunningham?
Not specifically for these 2, but what's the status of, hold on, I have it here somewhere. I must have it in the other folder. The chief
Of staff. Glad you asked.
Chief of staff, yes. Where are we on that?
I'm glad you asked. I can tell you that it closed and we got the applications the Friday before the tornado. So that kind of just slowed the process of going through that. So now we're back in the mode of looking at starting to have those, going through the applications. I have those, and I'll be screening for those shortly. So Hurricane Dorian.
Yes.
What, Tornado Dorian?
Tornado,
I don't want to
yeah.
name it a hurricane.
Okay.
Tornado Dorian came through and slowed everything down.
No, that's fine. Just curious if that's moving forward.
Yes, it is.
So your
And I do
goal
have
would be
those.
to perhaps have someone by the first of the year, maybe?
Yes, that is my goal.
That is our goal.
That is my goal. So-
Awesome.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
Superintendent Byrd?
Yes.
How many applicants did we have? Just curious.
How many can you?
9.
About 9. I think
I think
it was
it was 9.
All internal or internal and external?
Mainly external.
Mhm. Yes.
Is that 9
That's
that
interesting.
made a cut, or just 9?
9
Total.
overall
9
applicants.
overall applicants.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item, it was asked that the staff bring back some information and overview on the magnet. That's in Ms. Bridges here, and Dr. Akes. To give an overview of magnet and our school choice and everything. And I do want to say, not just for magnet while they're coming and preparing, that this past Thursday, Friday, Saturday was our school showcase. And so all of our schools were there on display, and I believe I can safely say we had a record turnout on Saturday for the community with over 2,500 parents to come through the school showcase for our schools. But I believe every year it's better, it's bigger and better. We had everything, not only just from the academies, but we had a lot of pets this year. We had therapy animals from Batman, who was a therapy pony, which was there in Batman, dressed up, if you didn't see Batman. But Batman was there. So I want to say thank you to the staff and everything as we did that showcase, and it was very well attended, even on Thursday and Friday with the students. And thanks to our staff, because for them to display their booths, and actually this year they did a gradual release. The kids ran the booths. Staff got to go and see other things that were about, but the kids were actually out there talking about what they offer at their school. So I want to give a plug. Ms. Cunningham.
And I just want to say, I love the name change. It truly reflects what it is. Because while the W3E, all of that has significance to the general public, when you say that, they're like, I don't really know what that means. When you say school showcase or showcase of schools, immediately, I shared it and so many kids went and were able to see what all we have. So personally, I really like the name change, so for what it's worth.
Ms. Moore?
I enjoyed the alpacas myself, but
Oh, yeah.
I'll tell you an alpaca story later.
I was disappointed.
but I didn't. Do we collect how many students came, how many community members, like separately? Like, if we had 2,500 parents come in that weren't connected to the schools, that's a different number than,
On Thursday and Friday, we had about 10,000 kids
Yes.
come through.
Okay.
We felt.
Well, I was
on
there
Saturday
swimming
morning.
through middle school, so yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we had registered to bring through there was 10,000.
But we had 2,500 community members.
We had 2,500 come on Saturday.
On Saturday.
only.
On Saturday
Yeah. Okay.
alone. So
Alone.
in addition to the 10,000, we had Thursday and Friday.
Mhm.
So, and those were primarily community members. It was very interesting. We had charter school parents who were interested in coming back to traditional schools. We had homeschooled parents. We had people who were new to the community. So it was a really nice overview of community members.
And we had sponsors for that. I know there was a private school there as a sponsor, and they, I thought that was interesting. And they said, we don't want a ton of other private schools here, but we enjoyed being here, and we would pay for this to do that. Do we look for other, what are your sponsors? What are your target sponsors for that event?
So there's a number of sponsors. Geico was there. We've got in Florida that sponsors things. I don't want to leave people
The
out. I would
academies.
just tell you, we will be happy to send you a list of all of the people who sponsored. Some of the sponsors elected to have booths there, and some just sponsored in terms of support.
Is that something we would do in the future as far as charter and private sponsors?
That particular situation really was something that was an error on our part. We
Yeah.
would look to continue to extend that.
Okay. Well, as a community showcase, I thought that was great. We were showcasing the community.
Yeah, the challenge
Yeah.
of that is, where do you draw the line?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Exactly.
And so I think it's just easier if we keep it straight
Right.
to Polk County schools. And then if we have sponsors outside of schools that want to contribute and be a part of the booths and things like that, we're happy to do that.
And I would encourage, I was at a private event and encouraged people to go there, and it was, people were, they're just not aware of what we're doing. They have
Exactly.
no idea.
Exactly.
Even teachers in other settings have no idea. So we talk a lot to ourselves, education world, but I really want to see us tell that to, target non-education people. The radio ads were great. I heard those. They were doing live. You were live on air.
Yeah.
I thought that was great, and it picked up locally because that's one of our heavier local stations. But I can tell you that people were calling me, asking me about programs they were hearing about because they still have no idea. And to us, we can't believe they have no idea because we do this every day. But our community, there's a lot of them that have not been exposed to what we offer. So I appreciate the work on this and the expansion of it.
Well, and I will tell you, I know sometimes there's a question about, well, why do we take our own fifth graders or our own eighth graders? So I was talking to a fifth grade boy on Thursday, and I said, did you enjoy it? And he was like you, he loved the alpacas. That was his big thrill. But I said, so what's the one thing you're walking away from? He goes, I've always thought Polk County was a small place. then I saw all these schools and all the cool things they offer, and I realized this is a big place and I have lots and lots of choices. And I thought, what a great thing for a fifth grader to walk
Yes.
away with. You know, suddenly it's not just that single track because the big yellow school bus comes and picks me up. It's, I've got options, I've got opportunities.
And I think partnerships with the community, like just the fact that CFAA has added an unmanned, whatever their drone program is. So now, you know, you have realtors and title companies and people in the community that want to see these kids and what they can do for possible, you know, employees or things they can connect with. I thought making that kind of connection is important, so I appreciate that.
Well, and I really want to give our schools credit because they did a fabulous job. I ran into Mr. Hill and he was wounded. You know, he had the big wound and the bandage. But, you know, what a clever way for Auburndale High School to let kids know in the medical field, this is some of what you deal with. You know, how do you bandage a wound correctly?
And you know the one that caught,
Alpacas guys.
oh, the alpacas. The Winter Haven Medical Academy had an infant doll without the top so they could show what shaken baby syndrome was. And I kept hearing about it as I was going to booth, so I had to go find this doll that had an exposed brain. But I thought just the learning opportunities they were providing, multiple learning opportunities.
Ms. Ralston, Ms. Fortney.
Full disclosure, I am fired up about academies after spending a couple days in Nashville viewing their academies. But we also, I know you said we had the 2,500 on Saturday. There were also events in Winter Haven, Haines City.
Yes.
Am I missing any others? How many?
No.
What was the turnout that we had at those
So
prior
we
to
had,
V3?
so
or
we
to
had,
School Showcase?
we had between 300 and 500 people at those events, and that was in addition to the school showcase. So part of what we heard, what we tried to be responsive to the community, part of what we heard is if you live all the way in Haines City, driving all the way out on a Saturday is really tough. And so we worked with Dr. Ikes, he was really instrumental in supporting us in doing this. We used Lake Ava, and we did sort of a mini showcase, and it was awesome. We had great turnout, same sort of things. We had dogs to pet and projects to do, and kids left with artwork, and we did the artwork in the middle of the room and then set the booths all around the edge. So the parents really loved that because they dropped their kids off and they actually had time to talk to other adults and kids. And so, yeah, so we did that in Winter Haven as well. Again, trying to minimize the distance that parents have to travel. And we had Spanish interpreters there, so when we met a family that perhaps wasn't as strong in their English, we sent them over to the Spanish interpreter. She walked all the way around with them, explained everything, so I felt like that was a really good success.
Awesome. I stopped by the one in Winter Haven, and I was about 10 minutes early because I was rushing to another event, and there I couldn't find a parking spot because there were about 50 other families that were early and beating down the doors to get in. So it was, thank you for doing that.
Ms. Fortney?
Oh, yeah, positive all the way. I know somebody was, you know, there's always somebody who's like, how much is this cost, kind of thing. And I said, you can't put a price tag on exposing these
Right.
kids that can't get out of Mulberry or Fort Meade
That's right.
to that. And, you know, even as a classroom teacher, it was nice not to have to ride the bus over there, I can tell you that, as the 8th grade organizer. And be able to kind of meander around and stuff, but just to watch those kids, like, it's so out of their realm, you know, and it's good PR for us, like Ms. Miller said. I mean, you can't put a price tag on that either, because as I've said numerous times, and if you follow me on Facebook, public schools just do it better, period.
Comment? Anything? Okay. Thank you. Now you all are ready.
All right, well, that's a lovely way to start, and I do want to give Steve Cochran and Tina
Yeah.
Spar and the workforce team really kudos for all their setup and work. So what I want to do today, and there's a lot of words on some of these PowerPoint pages, because I hope this becomes sort of a reference document for you. So for some of you, you're going to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's going all the way back to 1963. But I'm going to give you a really, really quick, not the Brenda Bartholomew, but the Carolyn Bridges, abridged version of how we got here. because it does sort of explain why we're doing the things that we do. And then we'll talk about the new process. And I do, just before I start, because I know this has been a question, we have, as of 11 o'clock this morning, 6,001 K-12 magnet and choice applications. That is up from 5,622 that we had last year at this time. We have 54 address items that need to be corrected. All of those were either sent to us after 4 o'clock on Friday or came up today. So in other words, we're caught up to within about 24 hours of work-to-work time on any of the address issues. Our biggest issue has been helping parents to understand that they need to work in Google Chrome. We do log all of our messages twice a day to make sure that we're kept up with everyone. And we keep all of our issues on a spreadsheet that's in Google Docs so that everyone who's working on problems can work on it with us. We had some hiccups the first day. So if you heard that kindergartners successfully enrolled, and then their choices were Summerlin Academy and the 2 IB programs, our response to that is we have very gifted kindergartners.
Yeah, that's right.
We believe they're ready for that high school curriculum.
Aw.
No, it was just one of those little glitches, so we knew that might happen when we first started the program, but we fixed that within 12 hours, and so we feel like it's going smoothly. I knew that for a parent whose address isn't registering, it doesn't feel like it's going smoothly, but we are addressing those, and a lot of those have to be one-on-one, so we're working through those. But if,
We have a call center open down there with 6 people that are actually manning that call center, so we're able to take those calls pretty quick. And I gotta give kudos to Carolyn's team. They're working through them, like you said, she's within 24 hours of getting every one of them fixed, so they're doing a great job. We'll keep it manned until the volume falls down, so we're doing a good job with it.
And they're bilingual too, right? Ms.
yep,
Bridges?
we had a full-time bilingual person in the office. Now, if someone calls in, we do a conference call with our, ELL was kind enough to give us a person dedicated to this, and we conference call in. So we have a translator working with us, and we've got everything done. And for parents who don't have access to computers, who don't have access to transportation to get to a school that has that, we are actually doing the application for them online while they're on the phone with us. So we take them all the way through, we get their confirmation number, we put it in Parent Portal. There is an exception to that. If you've already registered in Parent Portal and your address is incorrect, in other words, you've never updated it, they do have to go to the school to update that. And the reason for that is you have to bring 2 proofs of residence. For our new parents and parents who have never registered in Parent Portal, they will have to bring those 2 proofs if and when they're accepted into the magnet school as part of their enrollment process. So we're not bypassing it, we're just pushing it a little further down the road. But that helps kindergarten parents and parents who are transferring from private schools and stuff. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have the hotline number?
I do, and it's on a sheet in your packet, so we'll get to that in just a second.
Thank you.
So, the whole magnet school process started, and you've got a copy of the PowerPoint in your folder. I'm sorry, mine's scribbled on, but it looks like this. But, back in 1963, there was a lawsuit that was filed. Basically, we tried lots of different things. I'm on the second page already. We did 6th grade centers, and we did busing, and we did rezoning, and all sorts of things. Finally, in 1992, we got to the point in time where after we had created citizen committees and presented a plan with magnet and choice schools to the courts, they approved us moving forward. So in 1998, we went back to the courts and said, hey, we're doing pretty well. I want to point out this isn't just magnet and choice schools. So this is school facilities and resources, it's hiring practices, it's ESE, it's student discipline. All of that was part of the process. In 1998, they agreed that we were making progress, and we identified a couple of things that we had to do. In 1999, we worked on a settlement agreement because our goal was to get to unitary status, which is out from under direct supervision of the courts. And so the court said in order to get that, you have to make some promises. And so the promises that we made was that we would establish and maintain school attendance zones that don't result in resegregation. We would keep our magnet charter and school of choice enrollment policies and attendance policies in place, again, to assure that we didn't resegregate. We would continue to recruit qualified minority instructional staff. We would continue to have alternate identification procedures for gifted students, special education programs, equitable administration of student discipline. So that whole list was part of what we worked through in the settlement agreement. Then in 2000, we went back to court to the Fairness and Equity hearing, at which point in time, the U.S. District Court dismissed the lawsuit and all of the pending orders, subject only to the enforcement of the approved settlement agreement. So as long as we keep doing what we promised in the settlement agreement, and we can demonstrate that. And by the way, if you go, well, does anybody even care? The Office of Civil Rights calls me every single summer, and they want to know any student who is accepted outside the lottery process, our approved lottery process, by school and grade level, so we don't give them individual names, but if we place a student outside the lottery process, we do that. Are there any changes to our enrollment process or the application and lottery process? So we have to be able to answer all of those questions and demonstrate that we're continuing to have that commitment. So we got there, everything's going along smoothly, and then there's a 2007 Supreme Court ruling. Supreme Court ruling says to Kentucky and Seattle, if you're using race as a factor in determining enrollment, you gotta stop doing that. Well, our enrollment system looked exactly like Kentucky's. We had from the verbiage in the original DSHAG order, we had a black and non-black waiting list, we filled the percentages, we made sure that we were good. So now all of a sudden we have to change our process. So in the short term, because that's a big change to make, in the short term we just merged the two lists, waited till we had 2 seats, put in a black and non-black students. Can't keep doing that because we had shorter lists just based on percentages of population. So pretty soon we ran out of black students to place in and our schools were getting skewed. So we took a look at the Berkeley Unified School District. You may wonder why in the world would we look at the Berkeley Unified School District? Because their plan was tested in the state and in the appellate courts. And so we wanted something that could withstand a court challenge if necessary. Plus we knew if someone wanted to bring a court challenge, we could immediately bring up the Berkeley cases, and that would hopefully minimize the likelihood of it moving forward. And we have actually used that with parents who have wanted to challenge the system. We tell them, you know, please have your attorney contact our attorney, and but there is precedent setting.
And that has happened also?
Yeah. But we've never had one move forward into the courts since we made the change in 2011. So I feel like that's a great process. One of the things I will mention is that we continue to work with Berkeley Unified School District. We're going to talk a little bit about census data. We use 2010 data. We're going to use some 2020 data coming up pretty soon. But not only does the Office of Civil Rights contact us every year for that information, but they have held up magnet school funding, not only in our district, but in lots of districts. If they feel you're out of compliance, and out of compliance, by the way, doesn't mean at our magnet and choice schools, our grant funds were held up because of something that happened at a high school out on the ridge. So it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with us. So they do look at the district overall. If you look at the solution strategies on A13, we revised the way that we do enrollment since we could no longer have those 2 waiting lists. So what we did was we looked at every single student. We used Brenda Tejuri, it was wonderful. She put little dots on a map. We had the county grid system, 1 mile square grids. We looked at every student that lived in that 1 mile square grid, compared the demographics of that 1 mile square grid with the overall demographics of the community in which that 1 square mile grid resided. Before we got to that point, we looked at other things like school zones, dividing school zones and zip codes. None of them really worked well. So there's a couple advantages to using county grids. Number one, it's something that we don't own or create. It's neutral in the sense of the district doesn't have a hand in its outcome. We also use the emergency management system's address verifications. So someone who lives on a corner and it happens to be at the edge of a particular zone, we go by whatever that address is. And the grids are numbered using range, township, and section, which is available in our property appraiser's office, so if anyone has any questions. And the grids are fixed, they never change. So we like that as well. So if you flip to the next page, you'll see a map that looks like this. These are the original magnet school zones that were created by that citizens committee all the way back in 1992. We have not changed them, and that is very intentional. When we changed to our new magnet school system, we involved the Office of Civil Rights, the U.S. Department of Education, and the original plaintiffs in the DSEG process. So changing anything is a little cumbersome and complicated, so we try very hard not to do that unless we have to. So if you, there's an overview that we moved from the multi-year waiting list to the annual application. We use those county grids, use those 4 magnet school areas, and we use the federal AYP demographic factors, which we don't hear about anymore, but at the time that was a very well understood process. So we look at SES using average lunch percentages, we look at race, we look at students with disabilities, and we look at the average percentage of ELL. So we use those 4 weighted factors for each of the grids. Then we take those grids. On page 85, you'll see the information on those grids. We grid all of the kids in a map like this. And where there are no students, those are all considered in the average range. And then once we have students based on the 2020 census, we'll recalculate all those. So we have a low, a medium, and a high, and we pull, and the high and the low are far narrower pools than that big average group in hopes that it will move the numbers when we pull kids. So let's say all of us lived in the same grid. Now, we all have different demographics, we all have different free and reduced lunch, different race, all different pieces. So if this whole grid is considered a medium grid, if you pull me out of the grid, I might look very different than Carol might in the grid. So it's not an absolute, and we can't like throw them back in the lottery pool because we don't like the color of the fish we picked. So we're just, it's a way to narrow the likelihood, but it's not an absolute. So we gave you an example. This is the Lakeland map. You can see here that it's primarily green, which is the average group. And then you have some that are violet. It looks a little pink to me, but they're violet. And those students, based on the numbers, were lower than the community group in terms of points. And then the blue were higher. And so when we have an empty seat at a grade level, we look at what do we need to balance that grade level, and then we pull from the correct applicant pool. So in other words, when we have incoming kindergartners, first we take all the siblings, we look at all of the demographic information about those siblings, and then we pull the remaining 50 seats to create community balance. And yes, it is working. If you look at our numbers, we have increased the diversity in our schools when we implemented the new system.
That was the first time I've ever understood that. Thank you, Ms. Bridges.
Well, it's complex. It used to be much simpler, but they made it hard for us.
That's what they do.
Counselor.
But-
That's what they do.
But just as one of, well, I mean, it sounds like it's actually improved the system, but, so I just want to be clear. So it's average relative to the number of kids who are in, so child's applying to a magnet school, they're on a wait list, but it's not a sequential wait list. It's related to what the need is at that particular magnet school based on what the relative makeup is in the grid that's come from it.
Right, and there's no real advantage, so we have parents who do read this, because we presented this to parents in 16 different meetings before we implemented it, and we have it posted on the website. And so sometimes parents say, so am I in the blue or the violet or the green? But it doesn't advantage you because you don't know who you need based on, so it's just, we do a straight look at what are the demographics of that kindergarten class or that second grade class? How do we get them into the range for the community demographics based on census data? And then we pull students from that applicant pool.
It talked a lot about the kindergarten sibling priority. Do we have for incoming sixth graders, if their sibling is still in seventh or eighth grade at the middle school level, a sibling priority?
No, we only do that in K-5. Now, if you're at a K-8 school, the answer to that is yes, because the purpose of the sibling priority is to keep students together in the same building. We don't do that at K-8 unless they're in the K-8 building, because what we find is that we end up with more kindergarten siblings than the 50%. And so someone's really unhappy because they didn't get picked. They do go in the general kindergarten pool, but we do
I
something.
meant more so for like our Jewett Middle Academy is 6th through 8th. So if you have a seventh or eighth grader, does the sixth grader in the sibling priority?
No.
Okay.
No,
Is there a
because
reason
we
for
have-
that? or-
Yes,
okay.
because we have so many students who fill that from the roll-up schools.
Right.
Like all the Brigham kids going to Jewett, so you have a small community pot as well. And we got tremendous community, I won't say pushback, input, that they wanted as many seats open to the community as possible. So,
Yes, I was at that meeting.
yes,
Yes.
they were adamant about that, shall we
Okay.
say. Yes, they
I
were.
was just curious
Yeah,
what
and it's
the
a great
reason would be
question,
for it.
and I could have gone either way on it. That was just responding to the community and the needs they have. And that's especially true, like if you think of a school like Lawton Childs, where Lincoln and Winston feed in.
Right.
There's already so few seats, and then if we created another priority, pretty soon we wouldn't have any seats.
Okay.
But great question.
Ms. Miller?
I have a question. What exactly are you using for data since the free and reduced lunch applications aren't what we use anymore for most schools because the federal program doesn't require them?
So we have some formulas that the federal government has given us that's also based on census data. It's community poverty data and those kinds of pieces. But we are going next week to DC, and that is a question that I asked because we're struggling with that, and so is everyone else. Because the 1.6 multiplier really throws off the numbers. And so what we're asking the feds for is a consistent definition of how to define SES.
I've been asking that for years, only because it's throwing off Title I as well.
Exactly.
We need another way to determine that population.
And there's not, right now, I'm not aware of a way to do that where I could look you in the eye and say, I have absolute confidence in this.
Because a lot of our programs, you can be on WIC, you can qualify for some programs and not others, and that will disqualify you as this population. Not everyone income qualifies for Medicaid, but they could be used in another system, or they could have been on a reduced list. So it's really been unfair on how we've had to treat that. So I'm interested to hear what they tell you. Hopefully they'll update that. My other question was, we still have an inconsistent message on magnet schools taking students who may have IEPs or support services, depending on what school you call. We had a parent come to one of our board meetings and share a letter or something last year, and she followed up with me to let me know the child's on honor roll, like making A's and B's, sometimes straight A's, and this child made all 5s on all the tests, but they turned him away because of that IEP until she made it an issue. And that's happening. We have parents who don't make it an issue. They'll call the school, and the school secretary tells them, we don't take those students, and that parent just goes away. So what can we do to help the message that that's not, even though the law reads they have to only be 3% of the magnet population, students with disabilities or support services, how do we help change that messaging that we're seeing in the community?
So that is something that we have been working on really hard, and Dr. Steinke and I have been working on that, and I think you'll see that difference in our ESE numbers even in the upcoming year. So we've done a couple of things. We've had a principals meeting and an AP meeting where I spoke at length about the fact that ESE students need to be welcomed, not just accepted, but welcomed. We have a two-step process now where so in my office, we don't ask any ESE information on the application. If a student does require ESE services at the point of enrollment, in other words, they've been told, and we find that they have an ESE designation, we take a look at that. And if it is something we know the school can serve, we just put them in. No question, nothing. If we're not sure if the ESE IEP can be met, if those needs can be met, or if we can increase those services in order to meet them, we send them over to the manager in ESE for that area. They review them. Then after that is reviewed, then Dr. Steinke personally reviews all of them again to make sure that there's not a, sort of like high-level financial decision or personnel decision or something that can be made to assist us. And so we've really upped the number of ESE students that we're taking at our magnet and choice schools. We are working on the messaging. We've asked the principals to come back and report out. We've done activities where they sit down and write scripts for their secretaries to make sure that the right message is getting out. Is it perfect? No. Is it better? Yes.
I would just like to see some consistency, because some of our magnet schools do it well, and some of them, and we can identify the ones that don't, just by the number of calls where they're coming from. But also, I don't want to, we don't want to push kids into schools without support. So we've seen some of our magnets, kind of shudder because they are concerned with the level of support needed. So when we're offering that, or we're requiring them to make those seats available, I want the principals to understand they will have to ask for support. I mean, it's going to happen if you keep increasing numbers, and we can't have them not want to ask for support until there's a crisis.
Sure, and I will tell you this year, and the superintendent and HR and Dr. Steinke were wonderful about this. I had principals calling me 2 days before school opened and said, okay, I've got 3 more students that need this range of services. And we were getting units and things even after school started. So I think there's been a district-wide push to make sure those students are served correctly and appropriately.
And I want to add that Carolyn's right, we're not perfect, but I can tell you we've come a long way than we have been in the last couple of years by including the students in those programs, and we're only going to get better because we are being very intentional about making sure we keep our eye on that. And so if we hear about a situation, we're making sure is that a situation that with a student that we need to put the services in the school if they're not already in the school. And we have been doing that a lot more this year than before. We're not perfect, but I'm wanting to say that we're trying to fix that problem and make it better. The messaging from the staff that, if they've been there forever and ever, yes, that's what they think. They don't have to allow them, but that is no longer the message that we're leading out forward. It's all students, and we're going to give them the opportunity.
I appreciate that, because I have seen there's been a huge shift in the last 2 years, at least.
Well, and I will point out one more thing, which is that, remember I said we identify those students as ESE at the point in time when their application has been selected. We run about 15,600 applications. We accept about 2,040 seats. Most of those are kindergarten. So there are a lot of students at all levels that are a little disappointed on the day that the notifications go out. And we're sort of, it's wonderful, but the more we do successful school showcases and the more we do Haines City and Winter Haven events and the more buses and cinema ads, and the more people get excited about it, and so some of them are going to be disappointed, and unfortunately that's just a part of the system.
I saw Mr. Townsend and Ms. Fortney.
Actually, I've got a few questions, so maybe it's for you.
Oh, I don't know, I've just always thought, why can't we have every school to be a magnet school? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's just it. It's,
There's a pretty easy answer to that. I mean,
yeah. But it would be amazing because that excitement is so real.
Oh, it is.
You know, and
the
Well-
only way to do it is get rid of compulsory education.
Well,
Make
and
every
plus-
school.
That's not true.
It is. It absolutely is true. It is absolutely true. Sorry,
So,
go
can
ahead.
I say something real quick? So going to Academies of Nashville this week, they actually have students leaving their magnet schools to go to their traditional high schools because of these wall-to-wall academies. Which, for the one principal that was over at magnet school, she was like teary-eyed telling us about it because she was losing her kids to go to the traditional high schools because of their academies. So I think what we're doing with there's definitely places we can grow it, making it true wall-to-wall academies, but what we're doing with academies, I think, is on the right track to start
oh yeah.
bringing those kids over.
Well, and I was gonna say, that's the good thing about the school showcase, is, yes, we have our magnet schools on display, but we have everyone on display. And when you see, I love walking around, I learn things every single year when I go to the showcase and see, that you can work on race cars. I learned about carburetors, because the gentleman wasn't gonna let me leave until I turned the little, but that's wonderful, that there's just a lot going on, so I think we are meeting a lot of needs, but we're not meeting everyone's.
Trying.
A few things, because this is a very interesting subject to me. But first, I ran some numbers myself a while back, and I think this, compared to the charter schools that magnet schools are actually competing with, they're way more diverse and score just as high or higher. Both Lawton Childs and Union, for instance, consistently outpoint Bach. When you compare schools that have the similar sort of circumstances, one of the things I'm very pleased with, you look at Winston, Rochelle, Lincoln's improving on this. I think you see a commitment to schools that look much more like the areas they serve without segregating them. That's a difficult balance. And so it sort of leads to one of my questions. So Rochelle's about 50% black right now, that really was surprising to me, how that's a way higher percentage than I would have thought. Not given the neighborhood, but just the way the school has been over the years. But Lincoln's about 25%. Now, does that reflect targets that we've set around the neighborhood, or is that kind of the legacy of the old way we used to do it? What's the differential there, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So Rochelle is one of those schools that is K-8, and they have a very strong sibling policy. They're one of the schools that either bump up against the 50% or exceed it, okay? And they have a great deal of neighborhood support. The Rochelle High School group is still very active in Rochelle. And so you have a different community level of commitment to that program. And in addition, because that community selected the School of the Arts, that was what they wanted in their community, there was far more buy-in at the beginning, and that's become sort of I call it my legacy school. That's the family school where my cousin, my uncle, my dad, that's just an interesting dynamic of that particular community. Rochelle pulls kids from all over Lakeland, but if you look at their demographics, they tend to pull a much higher community member. One of the reasons we have the neighborhood priority at Lincoln is to increase that. We added a kindergarten unit. We filled up all of those kindergarten seats with neighborhood students. Now, I will tell you, not every neighborhood student was a minority student.
Right.
So, even though we've got this neighborhood priority, Lincoln also tends to pull a little heavier from South Lakeland. Rochelle pulls a little heavier from North Lakeland. It's not a question of marketing. They market exactly the same. It's just a question of that's what's.
And that would be based sort of on what the preference of the parents list, is that, okay. So, I mean, I think I echo Lisa's comments and the superintendent said. I think the approach to well, let me back up. You mentioned the 50% cap because that addresses another question I had. How do you define a school that is unsatisfactorily segregated or overly represented? Is 50% black the cutoff for a school? What's the?
So we look at those community numbers, hold on, let me see exactly what page it's on. So you have this chart, right? It's,
Right.
It's right after the overview on page 12.
Mhm.
And so, for example, in Lakeland, we look at our average lunch, free and reduced lunch is 66%. Students with disabilities is 14, ELL is 11, and then you've got that racial breakdown.
Right.
So we look at a plus, and so that comes out to a set number, like 11. So we look at plus or minus 15% on either side of that, and that's considered the community range.
Okay.
And then any grid that falls outside of that community range is then highlighted as either a blue grid or a violet grid. And then we pull from that. So what we're trying to do is to get within 15% of that community grid, those demographics. And that's why in 2020, when we have the new census data, we'll have new numbers in this chart. And so then we'll go in and recolor the grids to determine where we pull students.
Okay, I'm maybe we need to follow up more just so I can get this through my head. But so could Rochelle go to 75% black in theory? Like, I mean, is there a mechanism by which that could happen? What's the when we talk about an integrated or segregated school, how do we recognize it?
So if you look in Lakeland at the percentages, right now, if you add 15% to the 22% that are black,
Mm-hmm.
that is our ideal community number for black students.
Okay.
So right now, Rochelle, we're trying to decrease the percentage of
Okay.
black students, but not a lot because they're still pretty close in the range. So, but we are looking to pull students from communities where it's likely that there wouldn't be as many black students.
Well, that's a really interesting balance and question. I guess one of the really tough questions about all of this is one of the facts of integration means that if you're a child of color, you're always in the minority. You're like there's never a sense of a neighborhood school in that sense. And I think the success of Rochelle, how they're doing real well on the scoreboard. And the degree to which they reflect the surrounding community, I would think is a source of pride, and it's just an interesting balance. I'm not. It's like the hardest question in education, and I'm just thinking out loud about it. But you said it could be plus or minus 15. So in theory, 7% would be okay for black for Rochelle.
Okay, but that's overall. That's one factor.
Okay.
Okay, so we're looking at free and reduced lunch. We're looking at racial balance. We're looking at students with disabilities. So it's an overall factor. So if you add all that up and weight it, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, we should probably
sit
just
down
follow up and talk and go through it. But
it's a complicated process. But no, 7% would not be all right to
Okay.
answer your question.
Okay.
But remember, we're also trying, because we're not just doing desegregation for the magnet and choice schools. It's a tool to desegregate all schools. And so if there are additional students that are helping to desegregate another part of the community, that's a plus as well.
And I guess just two things. They're both sort of big things, but I just want to throw them out the thing. I mean, I really think the divide, perhaps more than race or class or anything, it's selection versus self-selection versus non-self-selection. And that, I mean, one thing that was never contemplated when you guys were or when this was first created back in 1992 or whenever, was that a bunch of people would seize control of existing district schools and make them almost entirely white. I mean, that's a choice model that was not built into this equation at all. And again, I don't have an answer to it, but when we created code. I mean, I voted against that in fairness because of exactly what happened. We created a magnet school with some great programs. We also created a turnaround school at Philip O'Brien where there wasn't one. I mean, we dumped 160 kids on it that don't live anywhere near it, and like all these things are interrelated, and it's a very difficult question, and a lot of it relates to how schools are evaluated and punished above us. It would be a less difficult question if the state was more understanding of what gets done to the schools that don't have this happen to them. But we still did it to them, and it's a thing to consider. And finally, what I would like to see us consider for next choice year is to add as a choice element the ability to attend the school you are physically closest to, whether that is a zone school or a magnet school. I would also invite the charter schools to participate in it and see who would. I think you can choose anything basically in this entire world for schools except the school you're closest to, and our zones certainly don't do that. I mean, our zones are kind of like they're gerrymandered in a lot of ways. So I understand there would be some difficulties around that. You probably have to cap it, so you wouldn't. That'd be a way to address some of the proximity questions in a controlled way. I mean, maybe we can set that as an operational thing to discuss, or but you're going to hear me talk about that more.
Mr. Townsend, going back to what Carolyn was talking about with the magnet schools, the magnet school zones are set, and they are not up where we can discuss or move them by the desegregation order. In other words, we can't move a magnet school zone, or we got to go back through all the steps that we've already taken through 3 or 4 layers. So it's not like we can say, okay, for Lawton Childs, we're going to accept this many students from this particular area that's not in the zone. Again, considering the mechanism, the zoning, and the mechanism by which the students are chosen has all been approved by the court, and it's gone through that test. So you can't undo any of those pieces unless you're ready to renegotiate that whole piece.
And I think when you renegotiate, you're renegotiating for the entire school district.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I correct, Carolyn?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so the way we did the Lakeland, the priority, we got permission from the Office of Civil Rights and USDOE to do a pilot program at Lincoln, which came to us, remember, as a request from the city of Lakeland. And so we have committed to run that pilot program for 3 years, do an evaluation, send up that report on what the impact was at the school. And then we can look at it at that point in time. But our commitment at this point in time is to run that process through, look at how it hopefully favorably impacts the school, and then take a look at proximity from that perspective. So that is something we're looking at. We just have to demonstrate that it's going to give us the results that we want.
Right. Well, I think Dr. Riggs may have misunderstood what I was saying. I'm not talking about changing zones. I'm talking about using the existing zones, just adding a choice element, which is if the elementary school you're closest to, you're not zoned for, you get to put that as a choice mechanism, and it's not completely open-ended. I suspect you would have to cap it at a certain amount, the same way you essentially cap other things. I'd like to see that built into the mix. I mean, it's a real hardship for the 5-year-olds that we're busing from the Florida Poly area to Philip O'Brien. I think there's all the kids we bus away from Winston to Socrum. Rather than forcing people back to their schools, why don't we try to do it in a controlled way through choice, and see if we could ease the burden on 10 or 15 kids, you know, and that wouldn't swamp the system. I think it's, but I still think it's pretty remarkable that in choice-friendly Florida, the only choice you don't have is to attend the school you're closest to, and that's I guess the end of my thing. But this was very interesting, so I appreciate the presentation.
Ms. Fields?
I just say historically, for Rochelle, if my memory serves me correctly, the majority of those students have always been minority students, I believe. And I think a lot of that has to do with the offerings of the school. And so to hear that we might be trying to decrease the number of minority students for Rochelle specifically, that concerns me. And the other thing is there's a process to this. It just didn't happen overnight. It's a long process. A lot of people work real hard, and that's missing from here. All the people that were on the committees, there was a lot of people that worked hard, talking to the community, trying to get input from them. So I think that when we start trying to make changes, we need to make sure we include the community. Because if we don't, it's going to be very difficult, and the road is going to be very tough. And one of the things that I personally would never want to see, and I would hope and pray nobody at this table would want to see, is going back to segregation. And a lot of the communities that we have, the kids are all of minority descent. And so if you're going to allow them to go to their closest school, at the end of the day, what are you creating? You're creating what many people years ago tried to stop. And I know the experience of being in a segregated school. I grew up like that. And that is not anything that any of us should want for our kids.
I would like very much to pile on to what Mrs. Field just said. This process took 40 years before we settled the litigation. U.S. District Judge Steve Meriday was our judge, and he is a scholar. And it took a long time. It took a lot of people. Bubba Boswell spent his career doing this. Larry Jackson spent his career doing this. Ken.
John Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. Larry Hardaway's been in the middle of it. This is something that people have poured their hearts and souls into, and the participation at the community meetings for these matters were the greatest of any matters that this board has ever seen. The outcome of that litigation is more significant to the school board financially than anything you've ever seen before. Literally billions of dollars that you have spent as a direct result of that 40 years of desegregation litigation. And what Carolyn was talking about, the annual calls from the United States Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, all those millions and millions of dollars of grant funds that come into the district are contingent on keeping them happy and satisfied that the district is still continuing its efforts to do its very best to remain desegregated. And it is terribly challenging, as she pointed out. In 2007, we had the Louisville and the Picks cases that came in and said to every district in the country that had been through desegregation lawsuits, and most of those had come down the same way ours did. You know, they did it based on ratios. And at that point, the Supreme Court came down and said, you know, all those years, all those millions of dollars that you spent on this litigation, right out the window. Now you've got to come up with a new way to desegregate the districts without looking at the race of individual students. So that created a scramble nationwide. I think we did a really, really good job of that, and I think that the U.S. Department of Education has been complimentary of that. You know, it was interesting when Carolyn made reference to the Berkeley Unified School District, which is not a place that you would think that we would compare ourselves to. But it's in the Ninth Circuit. It is in a circuit where if it passes muster there, it'll pass muster anywhere. And it has just been an enormous undertaking for so many years with so many people. But I did want to foot stomp. Yes, all those community groups that sat down and did the work. We should never take anything away from the level of effort that they put into that.
Okay, Ms. Miller, invite Mr. Townsend.
I appreciate what Ms. Field said, but this is where you get into the community response. Look what happened to Jewett. Jewett was bussing everybody out until the community said, wait a minute, these schools, they're magnet schools now, you put all this money and effort into these schools and they're phenomenal, and you're telling me my neighbor, my kid can't go and I live 2 streets over because I'm from Winter Haven, and that's what I experienced. We just pushed them all out. So there is a balance of community, the community had to step up and say, you will take our students now. And it wasn't, we weren't even, when we did that at the time, there was no apology to it. It was, you applied, sorry you didn't apply, everybody's getting bused to Lake Ship or to all these other schools, and the community told us to stop. And so, because the racial balance was so thrown off by the neighborhood the school was sitting in. So
It is
very
tricky.
And you have to listen to the community and what that looks like. But we can't go from everybody driving from the south side into Lincoln so we can fill that school with, people from 540A and not have any seats for the kids who live in that community. That's the whole conversation we've had for years, of that balance. And it's difficult. And I would hate that a court has to mandate us to do that, because that should be our goal.
Yeah, it's a constant challenge as the communities change and the demographic shift in Polk County. It is a constant challenge, and it changes every time we build a new school, because that affects all the schools around it. So it is calculus with multiple variables, and the only way to approach it is to continue to throw a great deal of manpower, brain power, community involvement, and keep on it. Because this is one of those things that if you do not continue to nurse it, it will die. You have to. It is a garden that requires constant tending.
Well, and I will tell you, just because I'm certainly part of that whole conversation about Jewett School of the Arts and Jewett Middle Academy. And that was why last year we had our recruiting event at Jewett School of the Arts, and we made sure that we actually went door to door and pulled the neighborhood in, because sometimes it's just a question of knowing that option is available and that it is a school of choice. And so we are seeing significant neighborhood students attending both those schools. Just like we are, even before we did the 10% at Lincoln, 20% of their students were neighborhood students. They lived within a mile radius of Lincoln. So anything we can do to build on that is a good thing, as long as we keep a balance and don't turn schools into racially isolated schools. Or quite honestly, socioeconomically isolated schools, because that's becoming a bigger issue in terms of what we see in performance and in terms of what parents are looking for. So that's a real issue as well.
And I think the messaging, because our magnets don't look the same. Code Academy has self-contained units with a therapy dog. Like, they have students that you would not find. I can't find at these other magnets. So if I'm a board member and I know that our magnets are so different in what they offer and what they look like demographic, I can't imagine as a community member how to know where to apply or what to apply to. So I know we've all done it in good faith, and this is how we're supposed to, we dumped all the money to make these magnet schools, but we have to be very cautious on, the messaging of that, because that's what I heard from the Jewett community. You don't want our kids. You wanted to make our schools, nice enough so everybody else will drive here, and you push our kids out. Luckily, that's been fixed because the community just stood up. So I think it's important we pay attention to it.
Mr. Townsend?
Yeah, I echo that. I think what Ms. Field said was very, very interesting. I agree with both parts of it. I don't think we should be reducing the black population at Rochelle when that's working. One of the real problems that we're trying to address in all of this is the so-called achievement gap on test scores. And if you look at the numbers, it would be interesting to compare how Rochelle compares to schools with similar demographics across the state, that it compares pretty well. I think it was you that mentioned socioeconomic or whatever. I mean, I think that's kind of become code for, again, selection, self-selection versus non-self-selection. If you're opting into a school, that's an inherent engine, and when you're not, it gets back to the question of why can't all the schools be magnet schools, and with respect to Sarah Beth, we don't really have magnet schools at the high school level. We have some academies, we have some, but so all of our magnet school kids are transferring back into our public high schools too, for the exact same reason. It's at the elementary and middle level, and I think this is a lot better situation than it was 5 years ago, but I'm still mostly concerned about all the other kids, and I think it's easy to lose sight of them, and that's why when I say, how do we, I'm not talking about upending a carefully balanced magnet school plan. I'm talking about adding one small choice element, which is, if you can see a school, you get to go to it. Like if you apply in time, etc. And I know you'll say that already exists, but it should exist for regular schools as well, for like zone schools, and so that's a thing to think about. And I'm happy to carefully calibrate it. Not just like open the floodgates. I understand all of that.
Well, that's a larger conversation.
Right,
I
agreed.
think that we can
Right.
have today. I
Right.
want to just wrap up with where we are with Parent Portal, because I know it's a new system. So I just want to, at the very end, beginning on page 19, open enrollment is November 5th to December 13th. It ends December 13th at 5 o'clock. We highly encourage, so if parents call you, please tell them, don't wait till 4:45, please. I know you can, but don't try it. We have in your folder, I've provided you a list of frequently asked questions, as well as it's got some pictures on it. This is all the places that we're doing our open enrollment ad campaign. So if you've been to the theater, you've seen our cinema ads in Winter Haven, Lakeland, and Haines City. We've got billboards, 16 of them in Polk County. Well, actually, we have 8 of them, and then they'll rotate to new places. So we'll have a total of 16. Yard signs, we've got bus ads, we've got bus wraps. So as people are waiting behind that bus and the diesel exhaust is blowing at them, they can read through the fog, the open enrollment information. We did the recruitment events. We did school messenger call-outs. We worked with our guidance counselors, not only to talk about what open enrollment is, but also that it's open to all kids and to encourage all kids. Lakeland Electric is putting it in their Access newsletter. It's on Bay News 9. So if you have some ideas on how else we can market it, we're happy to listen, but we really feel like we've hit a lot of things. I've also provided you a 3-color page that gives you how to enroll if you're already have a Polk ID, how to enroll if you're brand new to the system, and how to enroll if you have a Polk ID but never signed into Parent Portal. And again, if that's in the least bit confusing, please just have them call 534-0631, and we'll be happy to answer questions. Because I thought that was on the bottom of this, but it's
No,
not.
it's
So
not.
Sarah, we put it on the new one, but we made these folders ahead of time.
Okay, so it's the
fine.
one that's on this one,
Yes,
not the
it
one on
is.
this one?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Perfect.
And so in the upper right-hand corner of the Polk website, where it used to say bus delays, it now says open enrollment. If you click on that, it takes you right to the Parent Portal link. So everyone can enroll, whether that's career academies, whether that's ID or ACE, however they want to do it. I've got a couple of the most common questions. Do I need to fill out an application for every child in my family? Yes, please. Just because you check that you have siblings doesn't mean that that counts as an application for those siblings. And then, just a quick reminder that the way the student assignment, so after we've got all of these applications, we review that demographic category values for that magnet school, we pull the students, and we do a computer-generated lottery. So if someone tells you, I know someone who called someone and their child got into the magnet school, please get the name of that person, because it doesn't actually happen, and usually when we track it down, it's a random lottery process that we don't run in our office. We are so lucky to have Dr. Barrios and her team that has done the whole focus application with us. Kelly Jarrett's been awesome, and they run the computer generated system. And we do look at sibling priorities for incoming kindergartners only. We get asked very often, why can't you do a sibling priority for my third grader or for my fourth grader? It's because there's no seats a lot of times, okay? We roll the third grade into fourth grade, and then if there are a few seats, we really want that open to the general public. And that was really what we heard in that meeting from the general public. And then we do have a page that tells you the sibling priority requirements. Hold 50% of the seats for siblings. So that was, believe it or not, a quick overview. Didn't feel quick, I know, by the
I
end.
just have one thing.
Sure.
You have a student at Winter Haven who's amazing, who happens to have a disability and is excelling in one of your academies. I would include different people in this brochure next time it's up for print. She does have her arms, and she's in the medical academy and doing what all those kids are doing in the medical academy. And she's been featured on a lot of news stations and stories. She was in ROTC, but I think kids that look different ability-wise would be useful so they know they belong.
Absolutely. I appreciate that suggestion.
I would also suggest that maybe you reach out to United Way to see if they can distribute information about open enrollment, and then maybe hitting some of the after-school programs. Because
Okay.
you have parents coming in all the time, flyers or something like that.
And we did that for our BPKs, but we didn't do it for all of our after schools, so we'll get those out now so that we can make sure that we include them.
Thank you.
I just have a quick comment too,
Yes.
Superintendent.
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds mentioned your excitement about the academies. I'm assuming that's the career academies.
Yes.
Okay.
I can wait until board comments if you want, because
Okay.
I could
Yeah.
talk for at
Yeah, no,
least 30 minutes to an hour about it.
I was just
so
gonna comment on that
I don't want to
relative to
hold
this
up our.
discussion. And say, you know, I've, for a long time now, talked about the importance of career academies and technical training as opposed to what I believe is the state's focus on pushing kids into college. So, you know, it's nice to hear that that if the state isn't going to take that lead role, that we are. So that's a wonderful thing to know. So I'm looking forward to that.
Trust me, my board comments will be vibrant. I have lots of folders and information to share.
Okay.
Yeah, Carolyn mentioned Brenda Bartholomew. Brenda Bartholomew is still available to the district as a consultant. Brenda was our test and evaluation expert for many, many years, and I think she was involved in the desegregation effort for about 30 years. She has an encyclopedic knowledge. Now, if you ask her a question, she will immediately disperse that entire encyclopedic knowledge to you, so be prepared. But we have this incredible resource. She's sharp as a tack, and she remembers everything that went on there. So we're very, very lucky to still have that corporate memory, that resource available to us as a consultant.
Well, thank you, and hopefully the board enjoyed the overview. This is one of the ones that was requested that we bring back. So hopefully, I know it was a lot of information, but it was well needed. The next item, the chair has asked me to try to get through the next two before a break.
Oh my.
So, okay, the next two items, the one that's coming before you is Dr. Barrios, Mr. Barone is at a training, is about the system. As you know, you may be experiencing some issues with e-agenda, as e-agenda is kind of
On his last leg.
on its last leg. But the good news is that we're getting ready to move forward with the board docs and everything. But Dr. Barrios is going to talk to you about the first rollout that we're getting ready to have, which is it's called APPRISE. progress.
So as we looked at transitioning from e-agenda to board docs, one of the big things that we looked at was who was using the system and who we needed to set up users. We did have some challenges initially with board docs because it's not designed for hundreds of users to input items. And so a large group of users were principals, which primarily don't put board items that actually go to the board. So there were two big areas that principals input items into the agenda. One of the large ones is the donations. And so on the agenda you have pages and pages of donations, which really don't require an approval workflow. It was really informational. And so what we did is we developed a small system where they're inputting that information, and rather than you have item by item, you're gonna get a report of a monthly report of all of those items. That same exact information, but we just developed a small system to capture that information, in which we could then produce a monthly report and take each of those items off the agenda. So that will greatly reduce that piece. And then the second piece they used the system for were contracts. Lots and lots of small contracts that don't go directly to the board, 5,000, 500, 300. And so we're working on a process, an approval workflow for those contracts that's outside of the board docs. So the biggest change will be that you'll get a monthly report with all of the donations listed, and then the contracts you get quarterly. So your report on all the various contracts that go through are on a quarterly report that you get. And so we'll have a different process for producing that information for you.
And I can tell you that since Wendy Winchester's come on board, she has actually gone over and sat with Orange County. She needed to go through board docs. She's actually had the training, so we're really moving it forward. And she's excited. She's ready to kick it off now because they're having issues with e-agenda. So that is coming very quickly, but she's excited about it, and the ladies in the office are really excited about moving this forward as they're working in conjunction with other assistants in other districts as well.
And we're excited to have a program that works.
Yes.
I can't ask questions on the agenda. I don't open documents on the. It's been very difficult, and this is a large corporation that needs working software.
So now remember that, because you know it's gonna be some kinks as we roll it out. So, disclaimer's coming. But that's okay. We're gonna work through it, but I think they got a lot of support within the other district offices outside of ours, that they're able to talk to other people and they're able to sit down and go through it. So they got a lot of insight from Orange County assistants. Ms. Reynolds.
Do we know if it's going to work on Safari, Chrome, what browser we need to use?
Which one?
Probably
Chrome is the best bet, okay.
Chrome.
That seems to be the solution to all of my problems today, so Chrome it is.
Ms.
Are we
Cunningham?
gonna get training?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can see me
We
trying to
bring
pull
them up
this
to
up.
speed, yes.
Bring us up to speed,
With
yeah.
Susan, I hope.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Mr. Townsend?
Just very, very briefly, I want to thank Miss Winchester for her flexibility and her ability to be trained and her professionalism. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Gina. And the next item, which we bring these every year, is the school improvement plans, and Mr. Hill has those as Ms. Barnes out, and along with Ms. Varian back there. I would tell you that school improvement plans are plans that are constantly changing as we go into them and we dive deep into them. They were just released from the state back to us. They were actually, we had them on in October to bring in, and they weren't released back to us, so we had to pull them back off. And so now they're released. So we did catch something in one of the reports, and so that has been changed. But these are documents that we are changing throughout. They're not just, you print them, you sit them on the shelf, and that's it. They continue to move forward. So if there are any questions about school improvement plans or anything else.
Will I just get that one that's updated? Will I get that? before I have
Yes,
to vote
I
on it?
think
Okay.
they're working on that. Mr. Townsend and Ms. Fortney?
Just constitutionally, I guess. What what would happen if we didn't approve these school improvement plans?
Wes would have a coronary.
That's probably the best answer.
Yeah.
I would tell you that for schools that are under the Office of School Improvement, that is being monitored by DOE, that is something that they have to prove, we have to have. So if we do not approve them, then we will have to probably be answering to the State Board of Education about them, because that is what they're governed by, which is part of their school improvement plan.
You follow that path down. If there's a law that tells you you have to do something and you don't do it, there may be a direct sanction for it, but ultimately it could result in the elected body or members of the elected body being suspended or removed from office for violating that statute.
Well, I think this is gonna fall into one of those superfluous vote categories that I'm trying to highlight these days. Let me say I fully recognize the Department of Education's authority to impose the school improvement plans, as I do the superintendent. I'm not gonna vote for these, but we'll see.
Okay. Ms. Fortney, I'd like to have you next.
Well, I wanted to say hi because I saw you at Mulberry High the other day. And
Yeah,
my
I
three
get it.
schools had to present to their community, and I learned a lot. And you know, it was kind of the first time I ever saw data as valuable as that, because I could see the wheels turning of the community members. Like, this is what we need to do. And the other part I wanted to say was, I mean, we had all kinds of folks there, clergy and
Business,
people that didn't even have kids that go to the school anymore, that they went there. And, you know, so 3 of our schools were pretty well represented, and they've already sent me those PowerPoints, which is good to have because you can explain to folks that way. I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Ms. Reynolds and Ms. Miller.
I just wanted to say thank you for the zip folders.
We
Those
apologize
were
that the
wonderful.
flash drives did not work.
Well, in the future, and it may be different for the other board members, but I thought the zip was
More
much
effective.
easier than
Yeah,
my
it's fine.
computer's
Yeah, it was easy.
super high tech and doesn't have a USB port anymore, which I didn't realize until I tried to plug it in. So I have a workaround for that, but if we could just get it electronically,
that's-
that would be
Okay.
much easier. I
Yeah,
think.
this is,
That's fine.
it's easy.
Ms.
I
Miller.
just want to say the difference I saw and you know, I have multiple high schools, elementary, I have a mix of schools. I could pull the schools that are doing really well and just read through that plan and just the language used and what they were doing. You could see the difference in leadership, just our experience, like the more experienced principals. It was good for me to be able to see that laid out. Some of them had spelling errors. I was wondering, I hope somebody caught that before the state saw it. But it was just good for me, and I thought, well, I wish I could take this principal over here and take him over here and help, you know, because some of them are right on the money, and then some of them I could see them struggling in the plan. So it was very informative. I appreciate that, having been able to look at those. I would like to have seen them earlier, but that was the USB issue.
Yes, and we'll make sure that's corrected next year.
I mean, there is useful information. It's more the question of, like, we're just unnecessary in dealing with these, and at the lower end, at the turnaround end, these aren't school improvement plans, they're school punishment plans. You know, for the ones that aren't in turnaround, it's not quite the same, and that's so I'm trying to figure out ways to address that in my own way. So that's all.
Okay. Ms. Fields?
I have a question on when are the plans presented to the parents and to the SAC committee and to the staff of the schools?
Many of our principals, especially our CS&I schools, our comprehensive schools, have already given an overview, a draft copy of their school improvement plan to their SAC, and even at their parent meetings, their faculty meetings, and so on. We can't publish it until it's board approved, so that is what we are waiting on. But many of them have already shared their goals, their action steps with their SAC committees, SAC members.
Then my other question is probably unrelated, but the SAC membership, when can people from the community show an interest in being a part of a SAC?
Right now, we have asked schools to submit their SAC rosters. Technically, I believe they have until the end of December, January, to give us the final copy, the signed copy. But right now, we've been asking principals to solicit as many people as they can to join their SAC committees, and for our CS&I schools, their CAT
committees. And so if you can help us get that word out as well, there are many schools that haven't finalized their SAC rosters, so there's still time.
Okay.
And the only other thing I would add is, and staff member just said, please make sure they understand that, is that the school improvement plan for Title I schools serves as their plan, and if those are not approved, you jeopardize the Title I funds as well as UNICEF funding, so federal dollars.
I just wanted to follow up on Ms. Fields and Ms. Miller because, and the question she just asked, because talking about leadership and how that rolls out. When I worked for really good principals, we all had our own little piece of that school improvement plan that they trusted us with. And we would gather our troops together to present that to them. And then they would massage it to send. So it was a team effort.
That's a great point, because most people think school improvement plans are only developed by principals, and they're not. They're developed in collaboration with staff, and that is, you're absolutely correct. Is how they are developed, and then it is up for that staff to go back and they do a mid-year review. How are we doing? What do we need to change? Are we heading the right direction? Is this a too lofty of a goal? Do we need to adjust? So you're right. Thank you for bringing that up as well. Okay. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we're on a
So
break.
we're
unless
gonna
there-
take a
Please.
10-minute break,
Yeah.
10-minute break, and we'll return to the board part of the agenda.
Okay.
Okay, we'd like to get started, please.
Yes.
So the next item on our agenda is review of the school board meeting agenda this afternoon. Very quickly, and first of all, in talking to Mr. Bridges, we agreed that after the Pledge of Allegiance, we should accept the agenda before I turn the meeting over to the superintendent to conduct the reorg. So I will ask for a motion to approve the agenda, and then immediately after that, I'll turn the meeting over to the superintendent. So we do have special recognitions. We have,
a question about the chairman vote. Can I ask?
I guess so. Mr. Bridges?
Good work.
He has a question about the vote for the chair this evening.
I just wanted to ask my fellow board members if there's anybody who does not want to be chair or vice chair. like if you actively don't want to be, let me know. Okay.
Publicly? Now?
Is that like? I'm looking at you.
Oh.
Okay, if there's anybody that doesn't want to be, okay, that's fine. All right.
Yeah, and one good way of handling that is during the reorganization meeting, if someone nominates someone who would prefer not to serve,
They can decline.
that would be a good time for that person to say, I would prefer not to. And that would be the first time in the history of school boards. Has it happened before?
Yes, I've declined several, so, yeah, respectfully declined.
That's right, you
all.
certainly
I
did.
have, Been there, done that.
So,
Yes, but that would be a good way to do that.
all right. So we have some special recognitions. We have 2 sets of minutes. Any questions, comments, revisions for the minutes, related to the minutes? All right. We'll move on to administration, items C16 through item C20. Questions, comments?
C20. Oh no, I'm on the wrong agenda. Oh, yes, okay. LSI.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that.
Sorry, Dr. Akes. Here we go.
At least she apologized.
On page 4, first off, it's not mandatory. So I looked it over. There on page 1, it says it's not mandatory. Page 4 talks about what we were spending the $200,000 on. PD, coaches, leadership, rigor walks. And we're paying these folks $1,500 to $3,000. I didn't understand how that translates to 200,000, and I swear LSI is gonna be the death of our staff. I get the most complaints about that is anything.
C20.
Time consuming, rhetorical, they already do it, I don't know. I was just need a little guidance on what the 200,000, like what schools maybe, or are these our low performing schools, or?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Longo, I believe that, she actually placed this on the agenda.
Yes, so this is, we already have an existing district, contract, blanket contract for LSI, so that our 97 schools that are Title I, for example, are able to use their school level Title I funds if they so choose to contract with LSI and be able to have them provide services at their school. And in that contract, there's a menu of services similar to this menu.
Okay.
For them to, as a school, to choose to do, whether it be coaching days, or a needs assessment, or any of the variety of things that are in that menu. For the UNISIC schools, we have 21 UNISIC schools this year, and so they get the extra UNISIC dollars. The Bureau of School Improvement has a cap on how much can be spent per day. So it's kind of an artificial cap, because like some vendors will charge per day, others will charge not so much per day, but for a project, right? The only cap they have is the per day cap at the Bureau of School Improvement. So we had to redo the contract for LSI to meet the terms of the Bureau of School Improvement, so that if a school that has UNISIC dollars wants to use UNISIC dollars instead of their Title I dollars, for example, a school that has already committed all their Title I dollars, and therefore doesn't have any Title I dollars to contract with LSI, then they can use their UNISIC dollars. So this is a contract that met the standards of the Bureau of School Improvement, so that, for example, one school that comes to mind that did not have Title I funds but wanted to use their UNISIC dollars for LSI is Tenoroc. And so the only way that Tenoroc, Mr. Looney, would be able to do what he wanted to do with LSI was to get a contract in place that the Bureau of School Improvement would approve. So we went back and forth with DOE a number of times to get a contract that they would approve for LSI, and this is it.
So it's gonna cost us $200,000 more, or that's already?
That's a placeholder.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
that's just so that if a school wants to, they're able to use their UNISIC dollars, so that's not actually what's gonna be spent. It's just gonna make it possible for a school to be able to use dollars for LSI.
Gotcha. Which kind of brings me to another question, which I got here that falls under that, because I've been told, right or wrong, that there is a lack of substitutes when these trainings take place, and so the kids get split up amongst everybody down the hall. So those folks that don't go to the trainings end up with 10 plus more kids, in their classrooms, because they couldn't find subs. And then the other thing, if you could clarify for me, was the sub money for each school. If it's a mandatory training, does that come out of their sub allotment money? If it's a mandatory training that they have to send somebody to, that makes sense?
There's multiple layers to that,
Okay.
and so I'm gonna chunk it if you don't mind.
I will try to.
One thing that I heard you say was if they choose to do an LSI initiative with these Title I or UNISIC or whatever funds, right? Then how are those subs covered? And we have a planning sheet that we use with the schools, so for any staff development, whether it's LSI or anything else, if they're wanting to do an initiative with anyone, and it's going to require subs, and we actually have a planning sheet for them to be able to budget for not just the staff development person to come in, the vendor, but also for those sub days. If it's after hours, that planning sheet also calculates how much it will cost for the teachers who choose to attend, whether it's after school or before school or on Saturday.
So we help the schools in that way to be able to calculate the total expense, not just for the contract, but for the subs or for the stipends for the teachers to get paid. This way, we're able to budget ahead and not be surprised by, oh, we don't have money for subs, you know, but we already have this initiative approved. Just trying to be a little bit more proactive with that with the schools. So we've been doing that for a few years, I think 3 years now, to help the schools in that planning. So I would not be able to control, however, for the fact that perhaps Kelly Services didn't have sufficient subs to send. That would be the only situation where I could see that needing to happen, but otherwise, we're actually doing a lot of pre-planning to prevent that from happening. If it's a district mandated LSI, I'm gonna defer to Dr. Akes, but the schools would have their pot of subs. If they need additional, then they would have to then turn to their school level Title I funds to provide, but I'm not quite sure how that works.
Yeah, I think it would depend on each school and where they're actually drawing the money from. But if you have a school that has a particular concern over the amount of subs that they're needing, you just need to let us know. And I can look at it school by school with you.
Yes, that specificity is very important.
Yeah, I know, and nobody wants to give up the name of their school, I'm sorry, they're just not gonna do it, so. That was my concerns. It will be the death of us.
So, the one thing that you did say, Ms. Fortney, it goes back to the overall initiative with LSI. You know, I've encouraged and reached out a couple different times for you and I to go walk classrooms and actually talk about that and look at it together.
Yes, I've tried to get with you.
And I'll be glad to set that time apart and let's sit down and look at it, to give an overall, I guess, off-the-cuff answer to what is the initiative and what we're doing. With this particular pot of money with UNICEF, this is a school-selected regional decision. Whenever they're sitting down looking at it, this is not something that's coming saying you shall do this. This is actually, would you like to do this? Do you see the benefits for your staff and for your students? And so the principals and the regionals have said, for this particular school, this is something that we would like to be able to do. I just think in the terms of LSI and the terms of initiatives in general, so that we get a little bit of background on it. When we were looking 3 years ago, well now it's almost 4, Ms. Bird, so it's been that long, when we were looking at the overall health of the board structure within the district, really the question becomes, what is our teaching framework? What is our expectations for within a classroom? And Marzano has an actual teaching framework where we're looking at what we teach, how we teach, and when we teach it. And so that's how, and the district was already working with LSI on some of those areas. And I just think, you know, when we're looking at it and we're talking about what we teach kids and how we teach kids, I just think that's good business for us to stop from time to time and step back away from it and look at it. Now, I know that one of the things that you kind of mentioned, or the one piece that you've actually seen the most angst about, was learning targets and what we do with those, and maybe some of the things that teachers are having to do with some of those. Again, I still think it's good business for us to stop every other week, talk about what we're going to want students to learn and be able to do. And really that's just what the learning target is. And I think that one of the things that we see whenever we're working with this is, you know, I think that we have some teachers that are doing phenomenal jobs, and I think that they're really working hard on this. I think sometimes it's hard to put it in the context of what we would call a learning target or a success criteria. And so it gets us to be able to stop and talk and discuss those things.
Thank you.
Mr. Townsend?
And again, if anytime you want to go walk a couple of schools and talk to some principals and teachers together, I'd be glad to do that with you.
Absolutely.
I hear conflicting things, but similar things to what Ms. Ford hears. It's more, I mean, let me clarify. The money we're spending on LSI, whether it's from Title I or from UNICEF, that could not be shifted over into personnel. Is that?
Okay, so there was a couple different things that would go there. There's about 3 pots of money that are actually being accessed. None of it's general funds that's that we use for LSI. One is a leadership grant that we actually apply for when we have to allocate what we're going to do with those funds. Some of it is Title I funds. A little bit of it would be Title II, UNICEF, Is there some TISA also in that? Okay. So again, these funds here, every bit of personnel that we could, like a coach or somebody that we would push to the school, even Ms. Porteous had the idea a couple years ago that we would supply extra hands on deck with what we call intervention subs. Anything we can do like that, we try to do. But the things that we cannot do with that money is buy a classroom teacher that generates FTE. And they're very, very specific about that. So anything that we could offset out of professional development, or that we would do that, we try to make sure that we pick that up with these type funds.
And I want to add that, keep in mind that some of these funds could be non-reoccurring. It depends on what happens when they're handed down from the state.
So it's very difficult for me to assess from my point of view how much value there is or isn't. My sense from hearing different people is that it kind of depends on who's training you. I don't know if we have all the same teams from LSI who are doing all the same training. I don't know how much variety there is, but are we collecting any kind of systemic feedback on what staff thinks about these?
We actually do for all the professional development. That's one of the professional development standards. There is a pretty consistent 3 or 4 people that actually do that. But again, it depends on at the school level. If the school wants more, and then they contract more. The contracts that Dr. Long has brought to you, this one and the other one that's kind of the other main one, we try to do that to make it easier for schools. In other words, that way that a principal and a principal secretary doesn't have to try to maneuver that process. But I'll be glad, again, like I talked to Ms. Fortney about, Mr. Constant, if you'd like to go watch some schools and look at it and see the effects of it, be glad to be able to do that with you one day.
And then I guess the third part of that is what I do hear, and again, I think the question of how much value is being produced by it is an open one that I'm not really qualified to answer. I know there are some concerns about it, but I think what is overwhelmingly a concern, and I don't know if any of the UNICEF grants or the Title I stuff can be spent for, is behavioral health. And I don't know if any of those funds are available for us to spend on direct behavioral assistance. I know we have the behavior plan, but if you talk to people at the high impact schools where we're most in need, it's the same thing over and over again. And the teaching frameworks don't matter a lot if you're struggling to maintain
I would maybe would beg to differ just a little bit on the teaching framework piece. I've always been of the advocate that the best laid behavior plan is a great lesson plan, and proper planning for engagement, I think, is always a key for whenever we're working with any students. However, we are bringing you that update for the SBRT in December. But Dr. Long, there are some behavior interventionists actually in this plan here that and have been approved by the DOE.
Yes, so we have Title I funds that are used to fund behavior interventionists at a number of schools. Again, the Title I use of the funds is driven by a choice from the school working in conjunction with the regional superintendent. So they're requesting their priorities for how to use the funds, and then we review it at the district level, but it really is coming from the school and the regional on how to use the funds. So some schools will choose the behavior interventionist, another will not. Some will choose extra support from LSI, another will not. And I truly defer to the principal and the regional on that decision making. We do collect the data, we do look at, the results from the feedback that we collect, but I'll be honest with you that my preference is to support what the school and the regional is wanting to do for their school.
Mr. Hill, did you?
Yeah, I think the context also we have to keep in mind is just, it's very complex and there are multiple barriers that we are working diligently to try to attend to. I know of schools that have selected a behavior specialist but cannot find one to hire.
Right.
So, there are multiple layers. I do think we need a strong instructional platform. I do think LSI provides that for us. So,
And I didn't mention counselors because you brought up counselors as well. That is the huge challenge we have with counselors. A school could choose to add a counselor using their Title I fund, right? But they can't find them to hire.
Right.
So
So that-
that's been a challenge.
So,
Okay, thank you. So moving on to item, the next items on the agenda are donations, and of course, we're very grateful to all of our partners in the community that make these donations to our schools. And so these are items C21 through C32. Questions, comments about any of the donations? Moving on to facilities and operations, items C33 through C39. Questions, comments for item C33 through item C39. We'll move on to human resource items C40 through C46. Questions, comments? And that takes us to our regular agenda, items R47 through R49. And Mr. Bridges, I notice you have an item. Requesting a public hearing?
Yes, sir, we,
Okay.
this is actually, we've already done the publication for this, but I wanted to advise the board we had done it. There's not a sufficient time period between tomorrow and the December meeting, so we went ahead and did the publication, public notice last week.
Okay.
So I'm just advising the board that we've done it.
Okay. So do we need to vote on something else? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
No, normally I come to you and ask for authority to advertise for public hearing.
Right.
We took the liberty of going ahead and doing the advertisement because there would not be sufficient time if I brought it to you today. So I'm advising you that we have done it.
Okay.
And I'll put that on the record.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, so any questions, comments about anything on the agenda? That takes us back to our work session agenda. I would like to invite Dr. Freo forward at this time to talk about the superintendent's evaluation. Before Dr. Freo gets started, the superintendent has some comments she'd like to make. But before she does that, Dr. Freo, I think I found an error on the scoring sheet. There was one item I think I don't recall making a grade that low, so I'll look at that and get back to you.
Oh, okay.
Maybe not, it could be my mistake, but if indeed it is a mistake, I'd like it corrected.
Okay, sure.
Madam Superintendent?
Thank you. And before Dr. Frejo begins, I just wanted, as I've done a couple of years ago, and I want to make it the statement publicly for our communities that anytime our employees receive 0 raise, I take the same aspect of a 0 with them, as I know that's in my contract as we're going through the evaluation process of looking at a raise. But if I am really concerned if our employees receive 0% of a raise, I too would receive 0 at this time. Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Freo?
Very good, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm feeling a little bit of pressure because I know the old adage of saving the best for last. All right. Of course, the purpose of this is not to take any action, but simply to share with you the results of the evaluation. And you also should have also received the full evaluation report in electronic format. And so what I wanted to do today was to take this opportunity just to walk through the way the report is organized, to point out a couple of things that might throw you a curveball when you look at them, and also to entertain any questions you might have about the methodology that was followed. First of all, the behavioral indicators that we used the same 5-point scale for all of the parts this year. Remember last year we did a little bit differently and there was some confusion, but this year it was the same for all of them. And what I did was to take all of the information from each one of you as you rated every single one of the items within those 7 different sections for the behavioral aspects. And I put into the chart what your rating was for that item. And so as you look at the chart that you have here, which would be the same chart that you will see in your report, you will see the ratings that each individual board member assigned for each of the 14 items for board relationships. And you will also see a board average, the third column from the right. And then you will see under JB, the superintendent's self-evaluation. And then the last column is the difference between the average of the board ratings and the superintendent's self-rating. You'll also notice that under BT, there are a series of blanks, and that is because Mr. Townsend chose, rather than giving the individual item ratings, to give a rating for that entire part. And so that will be reflected later in the report. So that was not a
with comments related as well.
I'm sorry.
With comments related as well. Like
Oh, yes, sir, and then with comments related as well. But I didn't want you to think that that was an omission. That reflects the data that was presented. The next chart that you have is for general leadership. And by the way, you'll notice that some of the board averages are shaded in blue. What I did was for those averages that were at 4.5 or higher, I considered those to be extraordinary in terms of how high they were, and so I shaded those in blue so that they would stand out. Any of the ratings that were below 3.5, I shaded in yellow so as to provide the contrast. So you'll see there, I think there are 5 different items that are shaded in blue there. I think it's interesting to note, you might want to note also that for the majority, the large majority of the items that were rated, the superintendent's self-evaluation happened to wind up being lower than the average rating that the board assigned. We have the same thing for staff leadership, exactly the same organization as we had for the others. I'll go through these quickly because you'll have time to look at them and digest them in detail later. Same sort of setup for curriculum leadership, for the relationship with stakeholders, for fiscal responsibilities, for professional growth. And then there's some summary so that you see that the next chart provides the summary of the average ratings for the 7 performance areas. And let me clarify here, because you're going to see 2 different sets of numbers, and I want you to understand what they're about. You know that each one of you rated every single one of the 14 items under the first section for superintendent behaviors, okay? And then in addition to that, you also were able to give your rating for that section, board relationships, okay? Those 2 numbers were not always the same. They were the same for some of you, because some of you gave an average, as you averaged up your 14 ratings, and whatever that was the rating that you assigned for that section. Others of you didn't. You might have summed that up, and it might have turned out to be a 4.13 average, but then when you assigned the overall rating, you gave it a 4. Well, that was perfectly okay too. You did it holistically rather than analytically. So in this particular section, you're going to see the average ratings, that is for the 7 of you, for each one of those performance areas. In the next chart, you're going to see the overall rating that you gave, not the average, but the overall rating that you gave for each one of the 7 performance areas. And in this case, you're going to see Mr. Townsend's ratings, because he did not rate the individual items, but he did give the rating for board relationships, general leadership, etc. You'll also see that Mrs. Miller has some blank spaces there because she sort of did the mirror image of what Mr. Townsend did. She gave the individual ratings to each one of the items, but did not give the overall rate, which is fine. I told both of them, that's fine if you wanna do it that way. But that's why you have the blanks on that particular chart. And then you have the overall Part 1 ratings, and this is where you've gone through all of the 7 areas, and then you had an opportunity to assign a rating for Part 1 overall. So you'll see the ratings there for each one of the board members, and then the board average superintendent rating. Then we went on to Part 2. Of course, there were the 5 goals. You had an opportunity to provide your rating, your level of satisfaction with progress on each one of the 5 goals. And again, you'll see the complete set of information there for each one of the 7 board members, the board average, and the superintendent ratings. Then we have something similar to what we talked about before, where you have the overall Part 2 ratings, which is the holistic rating, which might or might be different from the average of the individual ratings, and they're very, very similar to the previous chart, just computed a little bit differently. And then you have the Part 3 overall ratings, which is basically a combination of Part 1 and Part 2. And some of you, I think, did that. You took the 1 and 2 and averaged it, and others of you did it more holistically, where you said, hey, I think overall my impression is such and such, and that was the rating that was assigned. And again, too, you have the superintendent's self evaluation, which is virtually identical to the average for the board. And then in the summary, I just looked at the 3 parts, Part 1, Part 2, and overall, and just made a summary statement. I tried not to interject any evaluative statements, but tried to stick with just presenting the data. I think that it should be clear enough so that you can form your own impressions of the overall tenor of the evaluation. Everything that all of you wrote down on that sheet of paper is included in the report. It's not included here, but is included in the report, including every single rating you made and every single comment that you put on the evaluation form, and they're attributed to you. So there will be, for instance, BT and the comments he made on the first section. There'll be SR for Sarah Beth Reynolds and the comments that she made, etc. So all of the information is there. Nothing that you wrote down on those pieces of paper is missing from the final report. And that's what I have. The questions.
The questions on new board members who took this. The reason I didn't fill out the holistic numbers is because I am very data driven, and it kind of skews data if I can, in my opinion, if I'm going to rate something and then say, by the way, overall, here's a different rating. So I understand your data collection process. I just, it was just really broad for me. So that's why we went with I just skipped that part altogether. Because holistically, if we just did that, it would be a different outcome than these pointed questions. So it kind of gives two different measures. But I appreciate you helping me walk through the process for someone who's not done it before.
And it was fine that you chose to do it that way. That was fine. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I think Mr. Townsend is first.
Just, yeah, in my reasoning this year after having done this before is almost like the mirror image of that. It's the same reasoning. There's a granularity to the behavior ratings that I think is, a few of those things we could probably rate reasonably. Others, it's just we're just not in a position to. I don't think in any meaningful way. So it felt like kind of a sham to me to do it that way. So I thought the individual breakdowns were more accurate, and but I'm on the record not being particularly fond of how particularly the behavioral indicators are structured in it, and I'd like to see this structured differently.
Yes.
Well, it was an evaluation, and I felt obligated to respond in some way. And so I did try to make an effort to offer my thoughts on in each of the areas. And from my perspective, that's simply pointing out to the superintendent some things I think may need some attention. That's really all it is from my perspective. But I also believe this. I think we've asked Superintendent Byrd to wear a lot of different hats. And I don't think that's entirely fair to her. I like the fact that we are bringing in a new position. I think we've all agree that that's important. And honestly, I think my concerns will be addressed when that new position comes on board. I think that position is going to be very helpful to the superintendent in addressing a lot of those things that she hasn't been able to focus on personally. So I just wanted to offer those comments.
I wanted to give a different perspective. I've been on the school board since 2002. When I came onto the school board, we had an elected superintendent. And with a lot of community support, board members as well, we were able to turn from an elected to an appointed superintendent, and that was by way of Dr. Gail McKenzie, who's no longer with us. She was able to get us started in the right direction and to help us to understand what our role is as board members and what we can do to improve the academic achievement of our students. That's the bottom line. That's why we're here. And we've had other superintendents to come after her. And when Miss Jackie was placed in that position, she didn't apply. She was pretty much drafted. And she took it and she ran with it. And I have seen tremendous growth over the last, how many years, Miss Jackie? 4? 4 years. It seemed like yesterday, it was 4 years ago. So I can't tell, publicly, I can't tell Miss Jackie how proud I am of you. You work hard. You are genuine. You will roll up your sleeves and do anything anybody else would do. There's nothing beneath you. And to me, that's why you are so much loved by the community, because they see you for who you are. And I want to thank you for always putting the students first. You don't just say that, you show that. And I think we are very blessed to have you as our superintendent of schools. And so just be encouraged, keep going, and you have a great team. And with the added position, hopefully you'll get some relief and you'll be able to do some things that you need to do for yourself and for your family.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I will add that I've publicly shared that I worked in this county prior to Superintendent Byrd. And it was not a pleasant experience as an employee. And I would like to read something that I wrote on my comments just out loud. I am very satisfied with Superintendent Byrd's overall performance. My concerns are noted above. I will share that a board member from Marion County commented to me about the Polk County School Board and the relationship with staff. My reply was, our superintendent is not for hire, go find your own. Because I felt like that's what she was getting at.
Good for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and I too want to echo that we are blessed to have you, Ms. Byrd. And something that was interesting that happened recently at the beginning of school, we had a new principal, as most of you know, at Davenport School of the Arts. Her 4th day on the job as principal was when that situation occurred up there. When you get the phone call that there is someone with something that appears to be a gun anywhere in that area, as most of you may know, there are no convenience stores, there's no gas stations, there's no any type of businesses. So you automatically assume that they're going after the school. And so Ms. Byrd took off. I think she made it from Bartow to Davenport in, I think, 36 minutes, if my calculations are correct, and had the whole team from down here, as many as could go, to be up there, and offered a ray of sunshine to those people who were scared to death. So, thank you. Because I've been up there recently doing student leadership interviews for kids And the amount of staff and parents that came up and hugged me and said, thank you. She's amazing. She said, we were so scared where we are, and we know that if there's something going on, it's probably close, if not on the school campus. And their thought was, because we are in the middle of nowhere, nobody's going to show up or be there. And from the time the resource officer went from the front of the school, inside the school, boom, here is whatever, tons and tons of police officers from throughout the adjoining counties as well as ours and our cities, whom I have personally thanked. Davenport, Haines City, both mayors. But the most important thing to my principal was that Miss Bird was there. So thank you.
And I think Miss Bird is everywhere. I'm constantly, like, I'll leave one event with her and I'll get to the next event and she's already there kissing babies and doing her thing. That it's amazing to me how quickly she gets from place to place. But I agree that it's going into different community events and having your Chamber of Commerce and business leaders saying, how can we help support our superintendent? Because whatever she's doing is working is so helpful in our positions, I think, to not have to defend what you're doing, but to have them already on board and just say, hey, come along, that it makes it much easier to work. So thank you for your role, not only in our schools, but also in our community.
I'm just hoping that Grady does not read it.
I know, I'm sitting here like,
It's gonna be a
I
big
think she
trouble.
already knows.
Rob, we need to change the car.
Just tell him.
I think one of my concerns with this evaluation process is that it doesn't actually capture what Mrs. Bird does very, very, very well. I think it is a combination of absurdly granular things on one hand and absurdly big numbers on the other, and there's really no subjective attention to the things that matter a lot in the daily and strategic operations school. I think, actually I said this last year, I think it's the case this year as well. I think if it had been structured a little differently, my evaluation probably would have come out a little bit higher. I mean, it's fine. I think the collaboration with the board is a work in progress, but an improving one. I'm very pleased with that. I think we have a lot of strong-minded, intense people here now, and I think the attitude and the direction of the board and what's demanded of the board by the public is different. The expectations that we have set, a number of us, are different than they have been in years past, and we're all working through that together. I would echo everybody's very correct assessment. Mrs. Bird's true strength is how she connects to the public when she's out among them. Really represents us well, always has. I think not really a but we're not really assessing organizationally some of the really important things in the organization. I mean, there is really nothing in the evaluation system aimed at tangible improvements in climate and behavior, etc. I mean, like there's just nothing there. Like, and again, go talk to your employees. That's the thing that matters. How their daily experience is affected. And I think we talked at the end of the strategic plan meeting about this being sort of a natural termination point. Like, there's a lot of new things coming up. State's already talking about redoing school grades. I mean, the Jebs Foundation is saying they're going to hammer on making school grades harder to get ready for a bunch of C's and D's, or I mean E's and F's. Get ready for that. I think, how are we going to do the things that are going to retain our staff, that are going to make the climate work,
I know Mrs. Bird is thinking about that. I've talked to her actually quite a bit about it. But I don't have a place to give her credit for it. And honestly, Tom, that's on you. Like, you know, I think it's, I also think it's time to maybe think about how other cities and local governments do this. I think they rotate their facilitation. I think we pay a good bit of money for this. It'd be interesting to see what the comparison is. I want to see evaluation criteria that's more relevant to the operation of the entire organization. And I don't see that now. And as a result, I think some of the progress and improvement that I've seen, it's hard for me to capture in you know, so I try to do it in comments and you know, I'm ready to do this in a different way and come up with some things that matter more on a 1 to 5 scale than 45 behavioral indicators. I want a way to evaluate the outcome of the behavioral plan. I want a way to outcome to assess how we're moving in easing the impact of magnet schools on non-magnet schools. I mean, those are the kind of things I'd like to make priorities, less so I can evaluate them, but so we can talk about them and so that they're meaningful. And really, I guess that's my point. So I don't know if this is the point at which we say we're going to do this different moving ahead, or we have that discussion at a different time, or what. But that's kind of where I am.
So I'm going to come to Dr. Freyo's defense just a little bit here, because I think from a strategic planning perspective, what we've seen in this district is, I think, superior to most of the strategic planning programs and processes I've seen for other organizations. So I'm going to defend that. But Dr. Freyo and I have talked also about the evaluation and maybe finding a way to do that better. I know Mr. Townsend's indicated he's not particularly happy with it, and Ms. Miller said she would like to see some changes. So maybe at the next retreat we can talk about looking at how we want to see the evaluation done and maybe changing that format if the board members feel like they'd like to do that. But from a strategic planning perspective, I think we're very fortunate to have Dr. Freyo, and I would hope that we continue to take advantage of his services.
I was going to provide a little bit of input that we have from time to time altered, adjusted the evaluation piece, looking at what other school districts have done and trying to tie it into what we're wanting to have accomplished here on a local level. I agree with you. I think Dr. Freyo does an amazing job. He is very skilled in what he does. He's very diplomatic, in my opinion. And I don't have a problem if we want to maybe make some adjustments on the evaluation, but I think that we have to make sure that whatever we do, that the superintendent is included in that as well, since she's going to be the one that's going to be ultimately evaluated and making sure that it's something that is doable. It's almost like a contract when you look at it. So sometimes I think that everything that we've done in the past, it's not good enough for the present. But historically, the past is a part of your present, and you make adjustments along the way. And I think sometimes we lose that in the moment. And I think that we really need to remember that no matter what we've done in the past, surely some good has come from that, some way. And so maybe taking some of the goodness there and then bringing new ideas to bring it to a more of an alignment with the board that's currently here, along with the superintendent. But I'm very pleased with Dr. Freyo.
Ms. Cunningham, did you?
Thank you, yes. Couple things. One is, I agree, we've come a long way. I can remember a time when the superintendent's evaluation was not tied to annual goals. It was completely ridiculous, in my opinion. We worked very hard to get to the point that not only were the subjective evaluation, but also to tie it to the strategic plan and the goals that we've set and how well we're accomplishing those. In any organization outside of here, that's how you're evaluated and then compensated based on that, and how what you do as an individual ties to the corporate strategic plan and goals that are set by your particular department or whatever. So I was very excited as we moved through that process through the years that, and we have had other evaluators, and I guess it depends on who you have, but I feel that with him knowing, with Dr. Frejo knowing and getting to know our district and living and working here, I felt that of all the folks that have been here and done it for us, including our own employees at one time, came in and have facilitated this process. I feel that he does a great job and has brought us to this point. Is it perfect? No. As I was checking off some and evaluating, I'm like, I could go either way. Gosh, I wish I had a 0.5. I mean, there's all things. Each one of us are going to do it differently. But let me suggest, I think we need training in how to do performance evaluations. Looking at those numbers today, that immediately drew a red flag to me. A performance evaluation is just that. It's saying, here are things I think that this individual does well and why, and here are things that I feel need improvement. It's not a knock, it's not bad, it's just here's something that I view, but I've been through that training. That was part of my training years ago in my past life. So once you understand that, it's not bad, it's just saying, hey, here's something I particularly, as one person, feel that person X needs to improve upon. And I think it would be helpful, after seeing those numbers just briefly, that we maybe look at not only, Mr. Chairman, looking at the actual evaluation piece, but I think getting some training to go with it so that maybe everybody's on the same page. Not that we're going to evaluate the same, I would never say that, but I think we may need to look at that going forward as part of this whole process. Because once you understand that this is supposed to be taken positively, I know it's thought of as negative, but when I worked with mine, it was never negative. And I always turned the stupid thing over and I said, okay, now it's your turn to tell me, what am I doing? How can I better enable your job? How can I make things better for you? Is that normally how it's done? No, but do you want to get better? Yeah. So how do I find that? You get feedback. So I view it as feedback, not as, oh my goodness, a 2 is horrible and a 5 means you walk on water. No, that's saying in this particular area, how well in my eyes does this person perform? So I would like to offer that as a suggestion, sir, for maybe next year. If we roll through this actual document to incorporate in that maybe some training on evaluations.
I think that seems like good advice. Ms. Miller?
I'm going to agree with Ms. Cunningham on a lot of that. I don't know if it's because we have a different business background. None of this is personal. This is not a personal evaluation. We are evaluating based on the items you created here. A lot of it's relevant to the person, to the subject matter, to the relationship we have with staff or we don't have, because how am I supposed to know how staff is treated in certain situations? So it's very relative. The one thing, so I would like to change this a little bit, not take it completely away, but we need, if you had, we can talk about it later. We talk about the retreat. I did think it was a good base, but you can look at this and see that it's so I think the training's a great idea. I also would like to review this, not with you separately, Mr. Frejo, but with the superintendent. Because I could say, you know what, this was a 3 because I don't have background in this. I scored this a 4 because I see this happening. How can I help? How can you help me, enlighten me on that certain area of the district? It's very difficult to rate it as it's created here and have a private meeting with you when it's not relative to anything that we do weekly here. But I like the training idea because you can look at the scores and see this is taken differently from different perspectives.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, let me compliment Tom first. Actually, I want to be clear about this. When I was running in 2016, there were like 48 things or 78 things or happening. I mean, it was a disaster. I mean the rationalization process that people have brought is sound. It's gotten us to a manageable place. I just think there are a lot of things we're missing that need to be closely looked at, and things that probably we're looking closely at that we can't actually look closely at. That's my evaluation concern. And I think Ms. Miller's point about the filter role that Tom plays. Tom, I've enjoyed every meeting I've had with him. We sit around and chat, and I think Tom has a point of view. I think he clearly has a point of view on how a school district should be run, on how it should be evaluated, and with respect, I don't want him to have a point of view. That's my business. I'm the elected official, and that's a concern for me. Like I feel like sometimes we're arguing with an additional superintendent or an additional board member. Again, I enjoy the arguments because I'd like to have discussions, but I don't think that's the role. And I agree that individual conversations. Now, maybe wanted to facilitate the conversations with superintendent. That might be better. But I think the kind of having you be the go-between is maybe not the best, most efficient way to do it, and especially from my point of view, when I think Tom has a point of view that I don't necessarily share on general things.
And I need to respond to that,
Certainly.
because I think that you're absolutely correct that we see a lot of things different, which is fine. I have never, ever tried to put myself forward as having expertise in running a school district, because I have zero knowledge of how to run a school district. I have put myself forward as knowing a lot about strategic planning and a lot about evaluations and how you do evaluations. And I think that's part of why I got hired, is because of the expertise that I have in that area, and my willingness to share that expertise and to say, I think this is the way we should do it. The board can always choose to ignore my advice if you want to, but I think you hired me because you thought I knew what I was talking about in these particular areas. I do not know how to run a school district, and I would never suggest to you of how to run one or that I know how to run one.
I just want to echo Ms. Cunningham's comments and offer this. And it's unfortunate the press is not here, but this overall is an excellent evaluation, and we should see it that way.
Right.
And I would hope that when this ultimately, at the end of the day, the community sees this as an excellent evaluation and that our superintendent is doing an exceptional job. However, it wouldn't benefit anybody if we all gave 5s across the board all the time, right? I mean, we want to make sure that we're saying there are some things that need some work here and there, and that's really all it is. It shouldn't be viewed as a negative in my opinion either, so I hope that it would be seen in that way as well, Ms. Cunningham. So, are there any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I just want to make a summary statement with regard to what was being talked about with regard to modifying the evaluation. And you may recall, I know that you mentioned Dr. McKenzie and when you were talking, and yeah, we started doing this process when Dr. McKenzie was here. And the board and Dr. McKenzie collaborated in putting this together, and we took from some models at the national level. And we started out, and then we came back a year later and said, hey, we want to modify this a little, and we came back another year, we want to modify this a little. And so we did make, and we've continued to make those small modifications. In terms of, doing a sweeping change where you throw all of this out and take a totally different approach, that's not what I would recommend to you, but if it's something that the board wanted to do, then the board makes those decisions. I don't make those decisions, I just give you my advice. And if you wanted to do that, I would be happy to work with you on that, or if you think somebody else could help you better, that would be fine as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Freya.
Thank you.
As always. Before we move on to our otherwise regular agenda items, Ms. Reynolds did ask that she be allowed to provide a quick report, so.
I'll keep it quick. I'll try to keep it quick, but it was so encouraging. So as we talked about at the last work session, I attended the Academies of Nashville study visit last week. There are about 10 or 11 of us from Polk County that went, which included some of our academy coaches, a couple of business leaders in the community, Gary Boyer, who's the industry council chair for Construction Academy, and Ed Young, who's the industry council chair for aviation, attended. And it was incredible to walk into those schools and see how the academies are not just affecting 1 or 2 students or 20% of the population, but literally every single student is enrolled in an academy. And the way that they do that is that they start their freshman year, which every school that we talked to said the freshman experience was about a 10-year figuring out what we're doing with freshmen. But the way that they do it now, each of the freshmen are in a freshman academy, which when I first heard that, I kind of rolled my eyes because they started freshman academy while I was at Winter Haven, and it was not rolled out how this is, but it was rolled out how they originally started it. But their freshmen are each taking basically an introductory to life course that it's called freshman seminar, but they talk about everything from how to calculate a GPA to how to write a check to how to address an envelope to what are your career options and what does an engineer do, what does a auto mechanic do, different things like that. One of the things they kept saying over and over again is if the kids can't see it, they can't be it. And a lot of their students, one of the high schools we went to, they spoke 97 languages on their campus. I don't even know that I've heard that many languages in my lifetime. But it was incredibly inspiring to see how many students are involved from all different backgrounds, all different races and ethnicities, and all different, one of the schools talked particularly about ESE and how they were incorporating that population. Several of their students were in the culinary class when we walked in to observe. And one of the principals made the point, she's like, this is a life skill too. That cooking is something that these students are learning to do and they can do for themselves. And it was really inspiring. But I also learned that wall-to-wall is not how we've traditionally described it in Polk County, that wall-to-wall means that every student is enrolled in an academy, which is how they're so successful in Nashville. So I would hope that we'll at least look at piloting a school doing wall-to-wall because it was incredible. The way that their planning works, how they're incorporating what the students care about in their regular academic classes. Speaking with some of the business professionals at one of our panels, they're doing a career reading program to target those 9th and 10th graders that are falling short on their state test. And basically the two career industry people that we were talking to were chiropractors. They're pulling 4 or 5 articles every week that are industry specific, something that they would be reading to further their education in what they do, but they're using that to meet with a group of 4 students that they meet with every Tuesday afternoon. They give them the articles for the next week, the students go home and read them, and then they come back and discuss them. And the students are able to ask questions and talk about the articles, but they're not being asked to read Wuthering Heights or something that is not going to engage them or draw their attention, that they're actually reading things that, I want to be a chiropractor and I'm reading about something in my field, and they've had huge gains in the reading levels of those students that are engaging with professionals in the field they're interested in and are reading about something not only with their teachers but with somebody that they're looking up to as a community member, and how involved the community is in those schools, particularly on the businesses. Every sophomore does, well, first of all, their freshman year, every single freshman in Nashville goes to a career fair where they have over 300 employers there. And that's for them to see, these are all the job opportunities that we have. They then, they have a day in the spring where the 10th, 11th, and 12th graders are all taking the ACT. So every one of their freshmen in the spring go on a college visit to either one of the schools in Nashville. Some of them go to UT, which is a few hours away, but every single freshman goes on a college visit just to see, this is what a college campus is like. These are the things that they offer. And then their sophomore year, every sophomore does a industry field trip, so they go to some job site related to their academy. Their junior year, every junior does a job shadowing, so they are partnered with somebody in the field to shadow them for one day, just kind of seeing what they do in their job. And then their senior year, they either do a capstone project or an internship. Talking with some of the students, we had one kid that was telling it, I first met this person because he was speaking in my art class, and it was an auto mechanic or something, but he was speaking in the students' art class about, you know, how we use art when we're, when we're painting a car, things like that. He then job shadowed, they toured his facility on the industry visit. He then job shadowed him and then was interning with his company. He's like, but you know what? He's been at every one of my football games. And it was just so cool to see the relationships that they're building. So, yeah, I was inspired, clearly. But
Thank you
yes.
for the report. Yes, sir.
I thought Winter Haven High had wall-to-wall academies at some point. Didn't we do that a couple of years ago?
We back previously, Miss
We did.
Leroy that was one of the things she was looking at. We went to Clearwater and we actually toured one of the schools that's wall to wall there. It's not a true stand-up wall to wall fully right now. And when we toured the school, we met with the principal that actually did that one, and he kind of told the group, you know, what was some of the pitfalls and some of the pros and the cons of it. So it's not a true, that was one of the ones we were, when under that leadership, was trying to stand up as a wall to wall based on the tour to Nashville. It just never fully got implemented
Right.
along the way. I think
We
that
were
was
working towards
yeah,
that.
we
Well, I
were.
think that just
We were.
follow up with that. I mean, I think all that stuff sounds fantastic. The lesson here is implementation. Everything, it's
Right.
implementation.
Right.
And again, that kind of gets back to my evaluation point. You know, like emphasizing implementation, because I mean, I love our academies, but I think they tend sometimes to be one or two person driven. And if we lose that key person, then the academy is really a person, you know, and there has to be a pipeline for that, and, you know, and implementation, and so I mean that yeah.
And the key is community when it comes to that too. I
Right,
mean,
right.
we can't create it if the community doesn't buy into
Right,
it.
right.
It's, Ms. Warden?
I was just wondering if you would see any possibilities to pilot that, maybe like Mulberry High School or George Jenkins or Barton.
Again, the key is community. So that and that was the one thing he cautioned us on. When you go out, you have to go out and make sure it is what the community is going to support. So one of the things that he said, they did I don't know if it was a year or two, almost pretty close to 2 year legwork up to that to make sure they had what the community would support in there. And so I'm very cautious when, you know, standing things up. Trust me, she's already called me. Standing things up, and I said, no, pull back, because I don't, you know, you can't stand it up in 6 months. You know, you got to do all your research, all your work. Is it what's going to drive the community? Is it one of those programs we're putting in that the kids are actually going to get in? If you're saying they're going to be into these academies, is it what they're going to want to go to? Or are you going to have an influx of kids leaving out, trying to get into another school?
Sorry, I have one more thing I did talk about. So the way that they do their academies in each school is they have 3 to 4 umbrella academies. So like Antioch High School has, and I think I gave away one of the sheets because they had 4. But so this is their Tennessee Credit Union Academy of Business and Finance. Within that, they have 3 pathways. So they have accounting, banking and finance, office and management. They have teaching and service, which the pathways are teaching as a profession, health science, JROTC, and then engineering and automotive, which has automotive maintenance and light repair, digital design, mechatronics, not sure what that is, STEM technology are each of the different pathways. So every school has between 12 and 15 pathways normally that they offer, but they're under the umbrella. So the 4 academies, the 4 pathways that are under the umbrella, those students have, it's almost like a team of teachers. So they have the same English teachers, the same math teachers, the same science teachers. Watching their planning periods, we got to sit in on one of them, they're actually able to go through the kids in this academy and say, okay, this student has a low GPA, this student has an attendance problem, and sit in a meeting where they're all at the same planning saying, okay, he's at my class every day, I don't know why he's not at the other classes, I'll talk to him. And that's how they're catching kids and having, you know, a lot of times there's one teacher that has a stronger relationship with the students than some of their others. So it was really cool to see how they're targeting their kids and how they're doing it as a community, and also how they're using their core classes to feed the curriculum their academy classes to feed the curriculum in their core classes. So they may be using geometry to figure if they're in the hospitality and tourism, event management, and they're creating a table setting for an event, they'll do that in their geometry class, and their geometry teacher will help explain to them, you know, you have to have 3 feet between tables, and this is how big the tables are. They have to be able to pull back the chairs, but they actually do it in their geometry class, which was really cool to see kids think, oh, this is how geometry is going to help me one day when I'm wanting to plan events. But it's like that across the board. And one of the English teachers actually talked about, he's like, you know, I may be doing this to help out them, but I'm not losing anything from mine. I'm still teaching this book that I love teaching, but we're incorporating it in, this is how it's relating to what they're interested in. And my kids are more engaged now because instead of reading this book that they were bored by, now I've tied it back to the thing that they care about or that they're interested in some way. So it was really cool to see from teachers and students' perspectives how incredible it was.
Which is why we structured workforce back up underneath teaching and learning for the connection
Exactly.
and not separation.
Ms. Miller?
I think we've talked about this before with Mr. Cochran. That's exactly the intent of academies. When you have a child who's reading undergrade level or behind the other students, putting them in intensive class just to hit them over the head with the book for another hour and a half isn't going to help them read. When you find something they can engage with is when they start reading and wanting to read. They drop out and we lose them at such a high rate because they are frustrated and have no interest. So this is another way to capture them. It's also with the more significant ESC kids. I've been in meetings begging principals to let a kid in a culinary class, and they were scared to death because there's a knife on the table. So it's a mindset change. It's a mindset change to say, everybody uses a knife, everything's gonna be fine. Like, it's gonna have to be an acceptance of inclusion before we see that be super successful. And we've made improvements in this county, but we have struggled to open the door on access to our academies. But I've seen more in the last year and a half than I've ever seen.
Well, it sounds like, I think to some extent, I think sometimes we get lost in that academy word. I mean, what you're really describing sounds like it's like a major system in a sense that everybody gets a major, like, and the major is not limited to college things. So, you know, you can do I think that's more conducive to sustaining itself because when people hear academy, they hear something very, very specialized. I think generally, and if you lose that very, very specialized person, it's hard to replace that and replenish that expertise. Also, I think, don't we have a course similar to the sort of general life? Like I talked to a teacher at Jenkins, whose son plays on my son's basketball team, and she teaches something at Jenkins similar to that. I don't like, it sounded really good to me. I don't know. Is that a school specific thing or is that?
What, Dr. Acina, I think it's career to something.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know the full name
I
of?
have to pull it up, I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, I think again, some of these things you can find we already do if we can, and I think
It's just widespread.
well also tied into the point about the magnet schools earlier as well. I think one of the problems with the academies that we have is that they have tended to be populations that look very much like the magnet school populations. Look, I don't know what the exact difference is now, but you call it whatever you want, wall to wall, or majors or whatever. But the way to broaden it is to do that, is to make it across the board. So again, that comes down to implementation.
Just off of kind of what you were saying, that there were a couple kids that talked to us that were like, we didn't even think, my parents have always worked in auto mechanic, things that are very hands-on, the more, they're migrant worker, things like that. And, I came here, this was my first year when I got here, was my freshman year, I had to pick something. So I picked auto mechanics just because I thought that's the route I would go. Well, I shadowed somebody at Nissan, and then after shadowing him for a couple days, looked into other departments. She's like, and now I realize that I don't have to be an auto mechanic working in a garage. I could be their attorney that's traveling all over the world fighting their cases. And it just was never even on her radar. She thought, I can do auto mechanics because that's something that my family's done in the past. But this is a student that was required to choose something. And in being required to choose something, it opened up a whole new world of possibilities of, I could do that. And I have the certifications now to do that because I've passed my CTE industry test, but I also could go on and do so much more, and there's scholarships available to get me there and other things that'll help me along the way. which is there, it was interesting too, their guidance counselors they're divided by the academy umbrellas rather than by ABC or grade level, how, sometimes we do it. But they're able to put, and she's like, not every student that's under me is gonna go into this path, but a good majority of them are at least interested in them. And because I focus so much on these types of industries, I have the phone number of the dean of students at UT and all of these schools in our surrounding area that I can have them come and talk to my students and tell them what they need. We're the first ones on the list when a scholarship application comes out that they'll send it directly to me. Those types of relationships that they're able to build because it's such a tight-knit community that it's just, I can't say enough good about it. I hope more of you will also get the chance to go because it was really, really cool.
Since my cousin's a city council member there, I will.
All right. Seriously.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's in March.
Campaign for.
Did you really?
Yes.
Oh.
So next on our agenda, we have two items that were asked to be brought back. The first one is the legislative priorities discussion, and specifically, Mr. Townsend talked a lot about the VAM scoring, changing the wording related to that, having that somehow ensuring that we as a board communicate that we're not happy with that. But, and I agree, by the way, but I wanted to have the superintendent's input on that matter. So, Mr. Townsend, I know you had some specific insights.
I mean, it's just a matter of saying we oppose the use of VAM in mandatory teacher personnel decisions. However, if you're going to require the use, get it to us on time. That's really it. I mean, we can pretty that up, but that's what I mean. I think it's important for us to say, because if we don't say we oppose this misuse, they're going to say, oh, well, you agreed with it. And so I think you can accomplish the general and the specific in the same sentence. I just don't think that's a problem. But.
So I can tell you there's language that is now moving through. They already assigned it with the statute number, and it is to have the VAM to the school districts by July 31st of each year because of the appeal. So that's the language that's currently moving right now on that. June 30, when I heard that was really unrealistic at that point, because if you start moving, then when they do appeals, you got to come back and move. Of course, I've argued about VAM and moving teacher. I've argued that, and to the point that they will say we didn't intend to be VAM to be used in that direction, but the State Board of Education is utilizing VAM when we go up for teacher movement. That is strictly coming from the State Board of Education, which is why they're now putting it into language that they're moving through, saying we're going to instill the Commission of Education shall approve the use of the VAM, but we're looking at getting it to you by July 31st. That's the language that's now moving.
Right. I mean, the date is not my thing.
Yeah.
I don't.
I know you don't want to use it.
I think we're a political body.
Mm-hmm.
We think this is a bad use of the. So I think we should say you should not use VAM for mandatory personnel moves. Period. Then, if you do, get it to us by. I mean, we can say we support the legislation that moves up the. To me, it's only about including disapproval of the disruption, and that is caused by the use of it. I mean, it's really kind of a yes or no thing. I mean, we're either going to say that we do it or say it or not.
It is going right now. It's going up under statute. So up under statute, you will have to utilize it at that point, and that's where it is. Yeah.
I get it. I understand. If we say we oppose, the school board members say we oppose the use of VAM, that doesn't mean you're not going to still use it. It's not binding. It's our political public position. The public should hear from us that it's a bad idea.
And as an elected official, you can say you oppose it at that, but understand what the sanctions could be to the school district.
Right, but we're not ordering you not to do with it.
Right.
I'm not infringing on your authority. I'm talking to Kelly.
Oh, you're talking. Okay.
So
I'm not talking to you.
At one point
I'm talking to Kelly.
At one point in time, we had some we had that language in our legislative priorities and it was removed. And I guess my question was there a reason why we removed the language saying that we are opposed as a school board to VAM, using VAM? And if not, could we go back to that language again?
I think that we removed, it said oppose, I'm trying to remember, did it say oppose?
When you
Yeah.
said you removed it.
Something
Yeah.
along those lines.
Yeah, there was
Because-
something along that.
I understood Wendy removed it because we weren't gonna get no VAM, so we were trying to go
Right,
after
because they're
something we
gonna
would get.
still use
Right.
VAM,
Right.
Right.
which is now,
Right.
they're really tying our
But-
hands with it.
But basic political negotiation is say what you want or you don't want, and then pocket the win if you get a win. Like if the date is, I mean, that's not much of a win, the date, but it's like you don't negotiate with yourself. We shouldn't be negotiating with ourselves around something none of us agree with, unless we agree with it. Like that, I guess that's fine.
Ms. Fields?
One of the topics that I had selected to bring back to the board, on work session was VAM versus the SAO. And I think that needs to be understood if we're gonna do anything related to legislating VAM or no VAM. And I don't think that all of us are familiar with what that looks like, and that's, I think I had even said it to Dr. X. And we really need to have a conversation on that so that we can see the big picture. Because some teachers are not required to be evaluated by VAM, it's by the SAO of the students.
And
And I'm not an expert on it, I'm not trying to have no discussion on it today. I'm just saying that that's one of the things that I think all of us need to hear from the experts, which would be Dr. Hakes and Ms. Bird.
And I think that is a deeper discussion with VAM versus SAO, because even when you tie, and we try to use the different dollars that are being sent down from DOE, they have kicked back SAOs. They don't even like the SAO model. They are going to use VAM. That is very clear in what they tell us. VAM will be utilized if there's a VAM generated. That's just it. But as far as SAO model, they don't like that. So we've had to at least develop a different model utilizing some of the data, the in-house data that we're using, which has been approved. So we can just get funding to some of those teachers that had an SAO under a different model. So they have actually pushed that back, but I do think it's a different conversation, much one like we had with the magnet, where we come back and we can get a deeper dive into VAM, SAOs, and our new model called the Pope Growth Model. I do think that is something that you probably would like to hear more in depth, that I would like to bring back for you all to hear that. But when it comes to do we use VAM or do we not use VAM, we're held to VAM.
And
And I know what you're saying, just so you know you're not gonna do it, but we're held to
We
VAM.
need to go back and see what we did before. We need to have it in black and white. What did we have before? I don't remember.
It said that you had the last one we looked at.
Yeah, I did.
For 2 years, it said
Right.
that we, not that we weren't gonna do it, we just, the district
Oppose
just
it.
opposed
Oppose it.
the use of it.
You can oppose a thing
And still do it.
under protest. That is a way of adding that we're doing it
It
under
was
protest.
And if I could offer something very quickly here, if the Bush Foundation is talking about changing the grades
And they
again,
are.
then one of the mechanisms or tools that we might have is to say that we oppose the VAM scores, and that then sends a message to them
Oh, this is.
that what they're doing from our perspective is working.
Or,
19.
Yeah, I mean, we ought to consider adding disapproval of any adjustment of the grade criteria or something. That's a whole other can of worms, but. You know,
Insurance?
I just was gonna, when we talked about that at the last meeting, Wendy mentioned that she had changed that because it had been on there the past 2 or 3 years and we hadn't seen any movement, even when last year we asked about making it a deadline for it. So that's why she wanted to change it to there being a deadline so that there was more clear what are the baby
She's trying to
steps.
get a win.
We can do both.
Trying to get a win.
We can do both. We can walk into gum. They are not our parents. It is not no is the final answer, ever. We should be what
I mean, are there four, are there four votes for this? If there aren't, it's fine. Well, let's just move on. I mean,
We've already voted to,
Right.
on that one.
Well, what we
it
said
went
was,
last
because the superintendent wasn't here, we couldn't
Right.
have the fullest possible discussion on it, so we
Yeah.
agreed to bring it back to get her input on it. And the only question was, this was the issue, we had done it previously, we had said it previously, we opposed it, we changed that language, and the real question was, why? Is there any problem with us going back to the original language? And I guess that was the core of this conversation.
Because the other side is if you no longer oppose it, then you must be okay.
Exactly, and that's exactly what they're gonna say.
I mean,
Exactly.
that's the two different sides.
Mine, oh, sorry.
Ms. Fields?
My question, Dr. Hicks, just heard, y'all can answer for me. My understanding is that now it's either BAM or SAO for some of the grades. Can you give us a quick answer on that?
So when you're talking about teacher evaluation, every teacher has the opportunity to opt in for their evaluation to be on an SAO. In the event that they do not, and there is a BAM score there, then it would be counted for their evaluation. I think the piece that kind of confuses it a little bit is that when the DOE comes in and is working with a turnaround school, then they will request that you move staff based on that BAM. And it depends on the status of it, which has nothing to do with how they've been evaluated. And what Ms. Bird was alluding to, and what Ms. Porteous and Ms. Riley Hawkins has worked on, is that not only did they say, you gotta move this staff from the school because of the BAM, they also wouldn't award us certain funds because of the evaluation. They didn't feel like our evaluation model was rigorous enough. So you got several factors that are working together there on this. And keep in mind that it wasn't in statute until 2 years ago that they could actually do this. The Commissioner of Education chose on her own to do this and would make us do it. It was never in statute.
Not for DOE.
It finally became statute 2 years ago. So I think the piece that I think that Ms. Bird is saying is it's going to be here. The question is, how are we going to try to get in front of it? And that 31st date was an effort to get in front of it. But as of right now, we have the vast majority of our teachers are actually using the SAOs as part of their evaluation, and I think it's a very healthy process that we really, really support. But that evaluation piece is mutually exclusive of the SAO, of the BAM piece, which only involves a third of our teachers, unfortunately in a very heavy-handed way.
And we don't know what, the 2020 is when we're looking at a shift occurring, and we have no idea what that's gonna look like, because there's gonna be a lot of change. We don't know what that's even gonna look like yet. If it's,
I mean, it hurts no one to say this. I mean, let's be clear. Florida's BAM model is not rigorous. It's garbage, completely. Like it's not rigorous. It's just dumb. Nobody else is even. I mean, this has been statistically discredited as a mechanism for years nationwide, and it's used almost entirely for punishment purposes. We should oppose that. I'm not even talking about the evaluation part, as you know. I'm talking about only when the long arm of DOE comes in waving their equation and grabs somebody out of a class a week before class starts because they don't like the equation Tallahassee's kicked out for them based on whatever kids they taught. That's a ridiculous use of that equation. No one who even created VAM at the national level even ever envisioned that use. That's all I'm saying. That's a bad use. We should say that's a bad use. As of right now, we're saying that use is fine. Just get it to us by a reasonable time. I think that's a terrible mistake politically, because they're going to say, "Oh well, we didn't know." You know, that's my point.
Ms. Cunningham?
Okay, I would like to suggest, we're gonna go round and round, and you did say, do we have four? I'm kind of saying, it's printed, maybe my fault, because I asked for them, because I needed them for I gave a presentation this past week to one of our chambers. I just think at this point, because as we've said, it was a little bit late in getting to us and stuff, I want to talk about it. I feel like what Ms. Fields indicated, We need to have a discussion, it's one of those things we need to bring forward, but I just don't think I think we're gonna go back and forth. I think we need to move on and let it go for this year, and then I do think early in next year when we choose, I think Ms. Worthington is keeping lists, right, of what everybody has given. Maybe that's a priority coming out of the hatch here in the first part of the year. Mr. Chairman, just to kind of get that, because we may want people to come talk to us, and, you know, it's a huge thing. But I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing. I just think at this late hour, I think we move on and we get more information and data, and then truly put good language in there as we move forward. It's just my point, but I'm one board member, so.
Ms. Reynolds?
Sorry. I was kind of similar to what Ms. Cunningham just said. I was under the impression last meeting when we voted it forward and talked about continuing this conversation, that it was continuing this conversation for next year's agenda, that we were going to be having a continued conversation throughout the year. Obviously, we'll have an earlier session this year, so we'll have a lot more lead time between the end of session and the start of the following year session. But my understanding was that our continued conversation was for that purpose.
Yes, absolutely.
I would recommend that we have a discussion on VAM, SAOs, and our growth model, and that we do that, and that we lead up to, so we can write the next platform, that we put that in there at that point right now. And we can schedule that coming up real sooner, where we have that discussion with the board, that we understand all of the things. I'm never in favor, as you know, moving teachers at the last minute because of that. I've never been in favor of it, and that's why I will argue every time they want to do this. My thing was, at this point, if you're going to force us to do something, give us the adequate time to do it, so that we don't rip kids away from teachers. So I said we could have a discussion with VAM, SAOs, and the growth model, because that's new that you need to hear. You can also have a discussion of how they're utilizing the growth model when it comes to which teachers actually get the bonuses and the stipends that's out there. I think you have to hear that all in the context of the language that they're using, because you'll hear them use it, interchanging it in one conversation. Yeah, we're going to use VAM. Oh, no, we're not going to take that. We want the growth model at this point. And when we've had, I think, MOUs now 3 times, I want to say, 3 times. Because they'll say what they're going to use, they're not going to use it, and now they're not even looking at SAOs. So I think as a board, my recommendation is that we bring forth that. We have Stephanie here from the union that's been working with us on this, so she's very well aware of it. And then we can go forward. I hear you, what you're saying about opposing it. I hear you.
Well, I mean, I actually thought Sarah Beth was right, but I was going to take him about what we do. I was just going to take my shot. So, I mean.
Well, it's a very important conversation, and we will continue it, because I'm hoping that we can use even stronger language, that we can craft something that's even more pointed.
That's right.
Ms. Miller?
Yeah, I think that what the superintendent said would be excellent to use as a recording to help educate the public on what that looks like, so they understand when we say we don't want BAM, they understand what BAM even is. But also, you have people on the board who are advocates in different roles now. You have a very active legislative advocate kind of board, and so it's going to be taking issues. Mr. Towns is talking about systemically changing how Florida model works, not we're going to refuse to do it, but we're saying as a board that BAM is hurting kids, or the SAOs should work. That's a different context than we're going to put this on our legislative agenda and refuse to do it. So I think having that session, explaining everything, using it as a community piece, and then coming back around and saying, by the way, as we showed you, this is hurting students, it's hurting teachers, and then adding it back to the legislative agenda, which I think we passed already, would be the most effective thing to do. But it's a different stance than just a passive board. You just have a different board with you now, Mr. Superintendent. Aren't you so excited about that?
Very much so.
Okay, Madam Superintendent, we have
discipline.
We have discipline at 4. Do we have any?
I push it to 4:30.
Okay.
He has not gotten confirmation yet.
Okay. We may have a parent.
She's going back and forth, but he says she hasn't shown up or called back yet.
Okay, so we're moving discipline to 4:30. Lake Wales zoning, I think we agreed and staff agreed to include the Lake Wales charter school system on our maps and on our website to help.
So we have, Dr. Bridges, they've been looking at the zoning piece of that, and she's gonna share what they found out so far, or where they are.
So at this point in time, we're sort of stuck till DOE puts someone in that position. We only have an interim in at the DOE position. On our maps, what we've looked at is we can put Lake Wales back in as on the map, and we're gonna go ahead and move forward with that. We will still have the opt-out as well, so we'll have both on there. We want to be really careful to not shuffle kids back
Right.
and forth. Our concern is that if kids, and this has been some of their experiences, so parents take the day off, sometimes for a new job, they just moved to Lake Wales, they go to Lake Wales High School, they're told there's not room, then they're now have to drive somewhere else and go to that school and figure out, the bus transportation and all of that. So I think I understand that the concern, but we just want to make sure, from my world, that we're taking care of the parents. So that's what that's our focus, is making sure the parents are taken care of.
Mr. Townsend?
I mean, I think from that discussion, I had a very specific request. I think the board agreed. It was specific to Lake Wales High School, because I know the elementary schools are harder because of how. So we're gonna be able to put Lake Wales High as a zone on for Lake. Okay. And then, but you think you can also do that with the elementaries as well?
So what I was talking about first, because elementaries
Right.
really are a separate discussion.
Right.
We need to be able to put both on there. That may be a little confusing to parents.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think what we have to do is also connect that to a phone number, so that they can,
Right.
before they start traveling,
Right.
they can call someone who's going to explain that to you. Because, we have parents who couldn't tell you what a charter school was and how
Right.
that impacts their attendance. So we're looking at how to connect that and make that work. For the elementary piece, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No, again, I think we take the small incremental steps first. I mean, if we can
Right.
get the Lake Wells High zone on, that's great, and then we go
Right.
from there.
I think for the elementary piece, we need to do some work with Lake Wales to help them better utilize.
Yes.
So they have empty seats
I know.
at one school, like
Yeah.
lots of them.
It's 56% used.
Right, so they have the control and the power to rezone
Mhm.
or reorganize their transportation, because their zone is the Lake Wales High School zone in terms of the attendance zone or the attendance priority for Lake Wales. So we encourage Lake Wales to look at their own elementary transportation zones that they've created, and I'm sure they took them from a lot of the transportation zones we have in place, but they're doing their own transportation, and they need to adjust those, just like we adjust our own transportation zones, so they can use their schools a little more
No,
efficiently.
I completely and fully agree. I think the elementary schools are a much different, more difficult discussion that you have to have with them. Like we have to, because of, but so, can I ask one thing though? Because I've heard, God, it's so hard to keep any kind of truth out of there. There are rumors
Out of
afoot.
people, out of people. All people.
There are rumors afoot that we're gonna open the high school at McLaughlin in August. That they're gonna have a football team. I mean,
They are?
apparently that is. So can we have that said for the record?
When did you vote on that?
Well, that was my feeling as well. I was like, I don't think that could be true. But
I mean, can we, so that's, we can put that to bed.
So-
That is gonna have to be voted on by us. Okay.
So if you recall, when we brought that, I said it would come back before you for a vote.
Right.
Yes.
Because they have an EO in there, that's kind of on a pause right now. And looking at how their data comes out, shakes out, hopefully we can bring that back around for a conversation and a vote.
Okay.
And then if it goes to that, remember, we had the first year as a planning year for that. So rumors do get out. And I don't even know if you call those rumors.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. I heard it from a couple of places, and I was like, "What?" So anyway, all
I'm
right.
not
No,
surprised.
I know. Well, yeah, no, so.
We just need to make sure we're clear on something. The piece that Ms. Bridges is talking about doing is putting a static copy of the Lake Wells Zone High School on
Not the
our
interchangeable.
website.
Correct.
Okay, that is totally different than it being in Zone Finder, where somebody would type in a Lake Wells address or that area, and it pop up being Lake Wells High School is your zone school. You just need to make sure that we're on the
Can't
same.
interchange it.
We can't do that.
Well, this would be the reason why there was a concern with that. In years past, when it was somewhat like that, you'd take a disenfranchised child or parent that's trying to figure out where to go to school, and that made it worse. And so what we understood as the board at that time asked to make that change, and then, because we don't have any control over that, do they actually take the child or not? So I just wanted to make sure there was no misinterpretation of it. We do intend to put the static copy of what would be the old Lake Wells High School zone. But to actually program into what Carolyn and I call Zone Finder, it would be, I think, hard for a parent to really be able to then know where to actually go. If they get down there and that's telling them no, then it would be a different situation.
Right.
And I
just wanna make
really
sure-
appreciate Ms. Bridges' suggestion that we have a phone number, and I think we ought to have something bold and
writing.
highlighted, say, please call this number for further information.
Can we do that as the programming if they type in an address that would be for Lake Wells instead of saying, you know, this is call this number to apply? I mean, can we have that in place?
Again, I think that the concern was, as we understood it, when we were talking about it, is that you would be taking a parent that would be possibly in a child that maybe was struggling to really know which school to go to. I think that would be a direction that we would take from the superintendent and the board, but we just wanted to make sure we understood very clearly that if we do that, we have the possibility of our parents and students that struggle the most on where to go to school and get them in. What we don't want is for a child to get frustrated and a parent to get frustrated and then to quit. We would rather them be in our schools than to quit because they can't get into another one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I have a turn?
I'm
please, Mr.
sorry.
Johnson? If you just move into Lake Wells area though, they're gonna be clueless to any of that. And if they end up on Zone Finder, they're gonna end up in one of our schools when they should originally apply to Lake Wells. Lake Wells wants the kids that go onto our site who are moved into the area and have no idea where they're going. The disenfranchised students you're speaking of, I don't know that would I haven't seen that in the past. We've had data of that happening, but we have to be able to create. It's gonna be easy to use. Because if they go on there, if we're just adding it because the board wants you to add it, but it's not easy to access and it's not going to be used, that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is if I move to Lake Wales and I'm new to this county and I don't know what's going on, I'm going to go to the Polk County Schools website and I need to know I live in Lake Wales and these are the schools I go to. I don't know how we can talk about how to make that happen, but if it's going to be a static map, then it needs to be a huge bold print. Or if you're on Zone Finder, you prevent a Lake Wales address from being entered. I don't know.
We can do it a number of different ways. We just need to make sure that we understand the possible unintended outcomes, because we do have to deal with the students and the parents that are disenfranchised. You know, after we had the one discussion last year about the disproportionate number of students with disabilities and minorities that were being encouraged out, within a couple of weeks we had an ESOL student's parents that finally showed up at the district. Well, you know, and this student had been out of school for months because they didn't know where to go to school, because that's the step they had taken, was toward the high school and told it was full. So, again, we're gonna take the direction. We will do whatever y'all ask us to do. Just beware of the unintended consequence of, if you put it in Zone Finder, we cannot control what they get at that doorstep, and I'll do whatever you want me to do.
You mean you can't control the reaction Lake Wells will
Yes,
give
ma'am.
them, is what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't think the two entities could discuss that and have an understanding?
We'd be glad to have the discussion, absolutely will, but I just wanted to make sure that when we talked about and figured out the possibilities, we just wanted to make sure that we brought back to y'all what have that discussion and then get some direction from y'all and the superintendent on what we need to do.
Mr. Townsend?
I mean, I'm in favor of trying the zone finder, and if it becomes a problem, then we deal with it. But I mean, we got to try to move ahead with some kind of.
I just
Mutual
don't see a
respect.
family going to a website, understanding it's two different
I
things.
agree,
It has
yeah,
to be
that's too
basic.
complicated.
We're talking about our demographic. I mean, I'm not gonna be negative, but we're talking about a Polk County demographic of parents who will just not go to school when they don't know what school to go to, like you just described. Like we have to make it more clear than just
Right.
a suggestion.
Well, and to that point, if we're not gonna open, I mean, if the high school ideas, waiting, is there any reason at all we shouldn't have 3 days where the Lake Wells High people come in to McLaughlin and get the kids to apply, and then we track who doesn't go. Like I mean if
They
we
used to do that.
We used to do that.
I mean
For
I've been told they said they couldn't come this
No,
year.
they
I don't. It's so hard. Again, it's so hard to know what's
Yep.
what out there.
They did it for years. They were
Yes.
ticketed.
They
You got a
could've
red
been told
ticket
by
or a
the,
yellow ticket. And it just stopped.
They could've
And
been
that's
told by the
the
external operator.
response from Lake Wells. You guys stopped it. You didn't want your kids
External
coming here.
operator could have said, don't come in.
Oh,
'cause
okay.
They
So
have an
you-
external operator in there this year, which kind of guides a lot of things differently as well.
I checked the
So-
enrollment for last year, and
They actually
enrolled a lot of
they should-
students to that
yeah.
high school down there, and I was very affirmed with that piece.
There were applications
But I
last
do
year
think we
that
gotta
went
be
down.
mindful of the external operator and what we would be able to do for us transitioning with that 8th grade. But
The external operator would not allow somebody to come in and have a
again,
fine
we would
there.
have to ask that question. and it
Have to ask
depends
that
on when
question.
they
That's
wanna do
part
it.
of the contract with them.
So, Madam Superintendent, would it be possible for the staff maybe to put some options together for us?
Yeah.
And come, maybe bring a few things back for us to consider?
Yeah.
And it,
Sure, and when we were talking about the map, the idea was that when you go to Zone Finder, there's a button that takes you to that. And if there's a phone number and a Lake Wales
They
map,
would get the number.
that's a pretty good
yes,
start.
exactly.
Because at least they can look at that map and go, okay, I know I live inside this, so here's a number that I call. We're trying to get to the point where they're not flailing about. If they go to Lake Wales and Lake Wales says they don't have room, they don't know what their next step
Right.
is then, if that's the only thing that they have access to.
And they're gonna have to work with us on this because they're requesting this as well.
Right.
Sure.
So this is important to them as well as us, so.
Right. I mean, we really need to have people with good faith on both sides work on this.
So we can put that together for you and bring back some samples. But, and I would say if nothing else, the faster one we can get up is the one with the map, with the number they can click and they can
Okay.
call. And I would say, at least you start there
Okay.
Right.
with that
Yeah.
one.
Progress is fine.
Okay.
Madam Superintendent, are they calling us or are they calling Lake Wells?
No, they'll be calling
No, they're
Lake
gonna
Wells.
call up.
You gonna have them call you?
That's a great question. Well, they'll
Well,
call Candace.
It'll start
office.
confusion.
I know. They'll call our Office of Charter Schools.
Okay.
The Office of Charter Schools will say to them, you can go to Lake Wales, why don't you contact them, here's the
probably
phone
better.
number.
Okay.
But you also
That's
have an
probably
opt-out,
better.
because
Yeah.
just to have, even if you click
No,
on
it's
it
fine.
on
That's
Zone
right.
Finder, they don't know what to do with that
Right.
information. They need a person, or they need someone that they feel like, okay, here's a live person I can talk to.
Indeed.
If there's one
Right.
thing we've realized with the Magnet and Choice new enrollment system, is you can give all the directions you want, but what people really want is to talk to a
Right.
person who says, let me walk you through this.
Right, because as
That's
they're
right.
reading something, they may
Yeah.
have
They don't
questions, they
understand
can't
it.
ask the
Right,
question.
there's no one
They're
to
talking to
ask.
somebody, they can ask
Yeah.
questions.
So can I make the recommendation, we
Yes.
move forward with that, that step then where they can click and it'll call and they'll have a person they can reach out to.
Yeah.
And that way they're not going back and forth between schools and different things.
I think that's good.
We can make that one happen.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yes.
All right, the next item on our agenda is the accelerated reader AR point discussion that was started at the last school board meeting. And,
Yes, sir. We've prepared a presentation for you for that, where we give you the background knowledge of what we got going on with it. I've asked Ms. Ann Everett and Stacy Davis to join us. Also ask Ms. Townley and Ms. Henderson to be prepared to answer any questions, how it affects their schools. So we got two pieces that we'll pass out to you. One is the actual PowerPoint that we prepared with some data pieces in it, of course. And the other piece is what I would call more of an executive summary or white paper on it.
Good afternoon. Stacy's passing out a copy of the PowerPoint for you, and then a one-pager. Dr. H is always asking us to create one-pagers where we are concise, so you have that in front of you.
Thank you, Doctor.
I know you've met Stacy before, I think at a board meeting where she's presented, and I can't say enough about what huge shoes she filled when Dr. Prasan left our department, and she's come in and never missed a beat. So it's really a pleasure for me to be able to share this opportunity with her, for her to really kind of present to you. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over briefly to Stacy to introduce herself.
As Ann said, I'm Stacy Davis, and I have the pleasure of serving our district as the Senior Coordinator for Library and Media Services. And as part of my job, I support 78 certified library media specialists and 33 media paraprofessionals at 110 of our schools. And another part of my job is I also am I support our Books Bridge program that's funded through Title I. So that's a fun part of the job as well. Our department does support implementation of Accelerated Reader, as well as advocating for quality library programming at all of our schools in Polk County. We believe that putting students first is all of them having quality library programming at their schools. And we also support Destiny, and that's our district's platform for circulation, inventory, and textbook management. So that's my role serving the district. So we're going to start with an impact video.
Hi, my name is Shawn Albritton, and I'm the Library Media Specialist here at Chain of Lakes Elementary. I've been asked to speak on the impact of Accelerated Reader and what it's been meant to Chain of Lakes. I've been at Cole for 3 years now, and when I first came to Cole, the bigger focus of AR was on points and earning them. Coming to the media specialist position from the classroom and reading coach position, my administration and I began looking at what AR research and data said would help our students increase their reading achievement. Our beginning focus was that it is not just about the points, but about the student's average percent correct, and that would be the help to boost our students' reading achievement. Our incentive focus became students not only having points, but students who kept at 85% average with those points. Continuing for the past couple of years with this mindset is making a difference in our student achievement. We use weekly reports to share class data. This past week, 57% or 30 of our classes had an overall average of 85%, while 68%, 36 classes, had class averages above 80%. The district expectation is 80%, and Cole's classes are still striving for that 85% average mark. We have been in a school for 4 years in a row, and we are using this as one way to help us make it 5 in a row. This year we are also looking at word count and average minutes classes are spending a day engaged in reading. We have shared the research with the students that if they are reading 20 minutes a night, in a year they will have read almost 1.8 million words. The research states that if students are reading this many words, they will more than likely score in the 90th percentile on standardized tests. We currently have 30 students in 3rd through 5th grade with over 300,000 words after 11 weeks of school. And 7 of these students already have over 1 million words. We currently have 43 of our 50 classes spending more than 20 minutes a day engaged in reading. We have all this information because of Accelerated Reader. Making students aware of their own data available through AR reports is making a difference in how our students are looking at reading, and Accelerated Reader is making a difference. Another focus has been getting kindergarten and first grade to engage more fully in Accelerated Reader. We now have all 8 kindergarten and 9 first grade classes actively engaged in Accelerated Reader. And the teachers are looking at their data. We are seeing continued growth in STAR and STAR ELA assessments. This increase is blossoming into first and second grade classes this year, and we are hoping to see an increased achievement showing on FSA when these students get to 3rd grade in the next year or 2. As a former reading coach and Reading Academy trainer, reading research has shown me that the best way to become a reader is to just read more. As our LMS here at Chain of Lakes, I help connect them with those Just Right books. All of the students at Chain of Lakes Elementary know that this is what they need to do to increase their reading achievement. Accelerated Reader is an incentive program that is helping our students read more by identifying their appropriate reading levels, setting challenging but attainable goals for them to work toward, and showing students how it is making a positive difference in their reading achievement. Thank you.
What do you like about the AR program?
I like the AR program because reading is super relaxing. Plus, the Google series is one of my favorite series of all time. And I like reading animal facts that I never knew about. Plus, I like taking AR tests because I think it's super fun to do.
What don't you like about the AR program?
I don't like when you can't change your answer or go back, because what if you want to change your answer but you wouldn't be able to?
As a teacher, there are many benefits to AR. AR is the center of my classroom. It builds a sense of excitement here. Students whose parents have told me on numerous occasions at orientation that their child hates to read are loving to read by Christmas time. They're excited about taking tests. They're excited about the positive reinforcement that comes with earning points and keeping their averages up. The STAR test gives me a ZBD where I know the students can be successful yet still be challenged all at the same time.
Caden, can you share what you enjoy about Accelerated Reader?
It helped me with my reading tests, and it made me more confident about myself. And plus, it helped kindergartens like my brother learn words, like different words.
Can you share with us one thing you don't like about the program?
I don't like how you can't really check your answers, because sometimes the computer messes up and it chooses the answer you don't want, and you can't go back.
Accelerated Reader is a contributing factor to a cultural shift we are experiencing here at Medela Elementary. As the media specialist, I have a front row seat to the incredible changes occurring across the campus. One such change is the student participation within the program. AR is an inclusive program that provides an equal opportunity of success for all ages, abilities, economics, and home language students. At Medela, we value our varying population. I enjoy sitting down with a group of newly immigrated students, reading a book in their home language and seeing the excitement on their faces because they participated in the same program as their English-speaking peers. Students participating in AR are building confidence and becoming independent readers of choice. Another change I see through the Accelerated Reader is an increase in student engagement. It isn't uncommon for students to share how the program is working for them. Students love to share their successes, number of hundreds, the completion of a book at a higher level, or reaching their individual goal. Students are also beginning to engage in conversations about how their percent correct relates to successful reading strategies or the need to use different strategies. As a specialist, I have to admit it's exciting to find a returned book filled with Post-it note summaries. I have no doubt at the positive impact Accelerated Reader is having at Medela Elementary.
Could I interrupt? I don't think there was ever any issue about the
No.
program.
Of how
great
We're fine with the
Accelerated
program. I think the question was, it had to do with the points and the way
That's
the
right,
points
because they were moved up.
were assigned.
Yeah.
And I think that's the conversation
Yeah.
we really wanted to
Just
have.
raise it 20.
Yeah, I mean, the concern was that the cut score being higher or
Correct.
whatever it was would diminish participation.
Correct.
That's-
Kids are
So-
getting discouraged, is what we're hearing.
So we can answer, and I'm gonna let Stacy flip through. Let me give you the quick answer and then we can go through the data answers if you like. So one of the things that we've noticed is, and as we continue to implement programs, we know we have to refine that implementation. And so across the school, or across the district rather, we had schools that had a 50% threshold for getting, for passing, if you will. We had schools with an 80% threshold. It was kind of all over the place and not equitable to our students when we were comparing school to school, comparing grade level to grade level, and as students move back and forth. And so we spent some time going back into the research, working with our Renaissance partners, really trying to identify what is it that we need to be looking at, what is it that we need to be encouraging, and all the research supports an 80% pass rate. And so that was set at a district level, worked with regionals this year, really kind of made sure that this was the right move for us to make as we moved our implementation forward. And so that's what everybody kind of, after looking at the research and looking at the data, we decided to do. Some growing pains initially, absolutely. When the students take a STAR reading test at the beginning of the year, and we also use that for our state required progress monitoring tool, but when students take that test, it gives them a range, if you will, and students are to select a book within that range. And so it's important that we're in the range, but it's not just about giving a range to a student and telling the student, pick any book that you want in that range. Because if I'm a student and I may be going and stretching to the very top of my range, that's awesome and that's exactly what we want. But there are strategies that have to be implemented with that student to ensure that they're successful. So if I'm going to have a student select a book at the very top of the range, I'm going to sit down with them, I'm going to counsel them on that book and say, okay, let's think about some strategies that we can incorporate while we read that book. If it's a long chapter book, it may be chapter summaries at the end, just a 5-minute summary, so that when they finish that book and a period of time has passed and they sit down to take those questions or take the quiz, they can remember the details in the book in order to answer the questions. The questions are basic recall questions. They're not intense higher level order questions. They really are recall. So if students are taking the test within 48 hours of finishing the book, as is recommended with AR, and they've had strategies to help them be successful in that book, then we are seeing students actually achieve that number. And so we've been pretty pleased with that outcome.
So when you're looking at the, if you'll turn your attention to the executive summary that I've given you, I think one of the things that the specific question was, well, why go from 60 to 70? And what the media specialist...
80.
Oh,
To
80,
80.
I'm sorry.
Well, and let me specify, if the question has up to 10 questions, it's 80%. If there are 11 or more questions, it's 70%. So it's based on the
That's
number of questions
Still.
within the quiz.
Thank you for clarifying that. So on the white sheet that we have there, it talks about the ZPD with the media specialist did an excellent job of talking about that, and Ann just alluded to. That's actually a score that we would get from a STAR assessment. It's really, really important that that student is reading the right level book. It's almost like that Goldilocks effect. It's not too hard and it's not too easy. But what you'll see down there is actually the graph of the actual gain that would be expected if that student is reading and getting at that 85 rate. And it talks about the standard deviation of the gain. Here's the really, really important part. What you see is if it drops below that 65 to 60, it's not a gain. It actually could be a regression within their actual improving their reading ability. So what you have to be really, really conscious of, and this really goes back to some of the theory of practice with their teaching reading and the instructional level of the material that you're using. The student needs to be able to read it with an 85 to 90% accuracy. And if the student is not getting that 85 to 90% accuracy, then either the level of the Lexile level of the material is too difficult, or like Ann was alluding to, I've chosen a chapter book. It took me too long to read it. I was able to read it, but I couldn't recall what the actual questions were. So to actually be able to implement it with fidelity and get the gains that we are seeing with that, you have to raise that percent correct on there. And I think the other piece that we gotta be very, very conscious of, we do look at the percent correct, we look at the points, but Ms. Townley will tell you, and every time we have a discussion about it, that engaged reading time is a marker that we look at for every school. Do we see first graders, second graders, third graders, how much time are they calculated to be doing independent reading? So I think this is a growing pain, and I would open any questions that you want to have about it, but the purpose of raising it is because by the research shows in everything about how we instruct reading is if you're not reading it at an accuracy rate of 80 to 85%, closer to 90 as you can get, then you are not getting any kind of movement, any kind of gain out of your reading. Yes, sir.
So this is my concern. It seems to me like this would be a program to get kids excited and interested in reading, but it sounds like what you've turned it into is a huge challenge, as opposed to children doing something that would make them feel good about reading. If I were a child here, I would be thinking, gosh, this is not fun anymore. Now it's work. But so I think that's the first concern I have as I listen to what's happening. But the second concern I have is this. What I heard was that you talk about strategies, but if you bring mentors from the community in to do it, they're not going to know how to do that. They're not going to have those skill sets. So it seems to defeat that purpose. So those are the two concerns I would have. I mean, we want to try to make it, I would think, and I'm not an expert in education, I'm not an expert in reading, but it seems like we want to make this something enjoyable for students, something that they want to do. And hey, I'm going to get something out, I'm going to get a little reward, whatever that is. But let's make it fun. So those are my thoughts.
Well, I think that there's merits to what, both trains of thought there, Mr. Wilson. Again, when we talk about the purpose of AR is being able to monitor that independent reading, we also want to make sure that we're instructionally doing the right thing by that student. And I applaud the gentleman who came in and talked about he goes into the school and the fact that he's mentoring and reading. That's what we need every day. But I do think making sure that we understand the background piece of it. And I do think with the strategies that Ann has talked about and Sarah has talked about that we put in place in the classes, and we actually have the ability to talk to teachers and talk to different schools about this. I think that this is a natural growing thing, but I do think that's why I wanted to make sure you had the background on the participation is not waning. It's actually, we see that the participation is increasing and staying steady in those elementary schools. And I just think that it's, when you're looking at the average percent correct, again, for the elementaries, which is where we're really camped out with this, it's increasing. But I think understanding the why behind it needs to be at the 80% is just really, really critical.
Ms. Miller?
As a classroom teacher of 5th grade and kindergarten, it was my job to make sure the students were getting the books that were in their range. I wouldn't let them pile in the easy books so they can raise their grade, just like I wouldn't let them struggle to read Harry Potter when I knew they couldn't finish it. But I think doing this district-wide, you're really taking that away from the classroom, what the teacher knows and differentiated instruction on where they are at what level. I mean, you want to raise expectations for what they're doing, but you can't tell me every classroom across the district making this the baseline for them is what we do with other strategies. When this program is to encourage reading, this isn't we use it to assess how they're reading, but this is mainly, when I did it, and this was in the early 2000s, it was just to get kids excited about reading and keep it going. If I'm a teacher and not doing my job by making sure kids were picking out books that were part of their reading level, that's on me, just to raise the bar, to make it difficult and possibly discourage readers. I'm not making the connection to this at all.
Ms. Cunningham?
Just quickly, I agree, did the same thing. I'm not a teacher, but I'm a volunteer, and volunteered in a classroom 1 day a week for an entire year. And the only thing I focused on was reading and working with the children to get books. Everybody likes fiction, try to do some nonfiction and intertwine it. Bottom line is, what I'm hearing from the folks is, it's not the fact that we raised it, it's the fact how far we went. For some of those kids, couldn't we have maybe thought about, I understand the goal is 80%. I understand now what you're saying. But out there to that little child who's trying to read and get excited because he got his points and he now passed, I mean, those are little increments, but they're huge in the bigger picture. So my thought is, I would have loved to have seen us do incremental. I get we need to be at 80, but maybe could we have done, I don't know, for the school that was at 60, 65, for the school that was at 70, 75, or something, done something rather than, wow, we just went from 60 to 80. And some of those kids have turned, because they've called me and said, he said, I'm done, I'm not trying anymore, there's no way I can do that. So yes, I understand we're trying to raise it up, but we sometimes incrementally works better than just, here we are, 80% you pass or you don't. That's all I'm trying to say. And I've heard it from parents of those kids, the teachers, and that's kind of why I chimed in when the gentleman came to the podium. I really believe it's something we need to look at. I believe your statistics all day long, I get it. But to those kids, they gotta have that carrot. Come on, help me get there. So that's all I'm saying.
Yes, ma'am.
Not sure if you can do anything about it, I don't know,
Yes,
but.
ma'am. And I would say, that if the student is getting 60% correct.
He is.
Okay, then he's not reading the right book. Then the level of the book that he or she is reading, if they're looking at the ZPD and they're implementing the program as it is intended, then they're not reading the right book. Because the 60% correct will not, and you can look exactly what the research says here. This is not Michael Aik's research. When you look at reading research and the accuracy rate by which a student needs to read to move their reading level, you've got to get it up to 80 to 85. And I would say that, again, if we're not getting 60% correct, then we would need to revisit the piece of how we're implementing it. And I think that having those expectations for all students is very important from the least to the greatest. And I just think that we're all striving for the same thing, but when we got together and looked at the implementation this summer, I just think that's something that, and I know that Ann has worked on, there's a couple of ways you can actually have a student retake a test, and there's ways that we work with teachers on it, but go ahead.
I think just like a teacher needs to work with the student and help them select the right book for the right reasons and make sure we have those strategies in place, where we're aware that there are concerns, we've done those same types of things. So I've had a teacher reach out, you know, their student was devastated, they only got a 60%, they had really stretched to the very end, you know, they selected a chapter book, and she's like, I'm really afraid about what this is going to have, the impact it's going to have on the student. I said, look, we can back up, let's reset the test. We can certainly do that because it's a learning curve, right, for all of us. So let's reset that test, but then let's talk about how we have that conversation. Let's review the book with the student. Let's have them summarize that book, really talk about it. And then going into the next book, let's talk about some strategies that we can have with the student. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's all I needed to know. Life is great and I'm moving on. And so that student has been successful and that teacher has taken the time to do that. We're a large district. I think sometimes it's hard to get that message out. Sure. But this is in no way meant to penalize a student or a teacher who they're also tracking their points. And so whatever we need to do to help with those growing pains and ensure that the student and the teacher are successful, we are doing those pieces. And so I would say if there's someone out there that's still experiencing growing pains, we need to help them with that because that's our job too, but we only know about the ones that reach out. And sometimes teachers don't do that, but we definitely want to help them with those strategies. This is no way a one and done for the student, right? It's about, wait, let's back up.
Right.
We're going to make sure we get through this one together and you are successful at 80% because you can do that and we know that you can. Now let's talk about the next book selection. How do we ensure we do that on the first time the next time? So we are certainly having
I'll pass
more than
that
willing
along.
to have those conversations because you're right. And I think whoever said it before, this is about student success and enjoying what they're doing. Absolutely.
Mr. Townsend.
Yeah, just very briefly, you know, I think this really illustrates the core divide that I've been talking about for a long time between how the public sees what education should be and what educators sometimes see what, I mean, this is looking at everything from the point of view of the data, not from the point of view of the child. And you know, it's, and if you look at the data in the state of Florida, the NAEP shows this, our state tests show this, reading scores plunge with age. Look at that. Reading scores, reading participation plunge with age. Why do you think kids hate to read? because we've made it a data exercise. That's not on y'all, but we go from artificially spiking our third grade reading scores to kids hating to read by the time they leave high school, and our reading scores being crap compared to the rest of the country. Our growth is the worst because it's negative, and you know, this is just a symptom of that. And I think the point of whether 80% is the appropriate measure, I'm sure it is. There's a million different ways to tell a teacher this without telling the child, hey, all that time you just spent, all that work, all those 4 or 5 nights in a row your mom made you read, and you come up and we just told you suck. That's not true. Like, how many ways can we? I mean, can they not reprogram their fail screen to just say how many you get right?
One thing to keep in mind too about the Accelerated Reader program is the goals are individual. And I think that's important because it's differentiation for our students. So based on their STAR score, every child does not have the same point goal. And so the child who reads at a lower level will have a lower point goal for the 9 weeks than the child who reads at a higher level. And I think that's important because it gives all of our children a chance to succeed and to feel success. And they are most successful, again, when they're reading within their ZPD. And we have a whole list, Anne mentioned of strategies, we have a whole list of strategies. If a child is struggling, then we guide them to the lower end of their ZPD, and then we take steps. So you read at 1.2, you get 100. Okay, now let's try our 1.3. And so we're gonna build our way up to the harder books at the end. So I think, I don't think we mentioned that before, but the individual point goal is a very important piece of the program.
So what do they see whenever they're taking a quiz?
Okay, so when they log on to take a quiz, they have a choice of read to, read with someone, or read by myself. We encourage kindergarten to choose I was read to or I read with someone because then they can retake the test. And if they choose I read by myself, that means unless the quiz is deleted, they could not take it again. So as we're teaching our young ones how to read, they're learning how to read, we're teaching them how to navigate the program. The questions are read to them, there's audio. If they don't have someone sitting with them, they can pick that. So these are the 3 choices that they see. Okay, if a child does not pass, it just says you did not pass this quiz, and you can see what that shows them. So this would be an example of that.
And I think, you know, out of the mouths of babes, the 2 young men that talked about what they would like to see change is being able to go back and review their answers and change their answers. I think that's one of the direct results of what we've seen is, okay, I'm not being as successful. I think I may know the one I missed, or now I wish I could review my questions. That is completely valid. And so we are sharing that with Renaissance and saying, look, as one of the enhancements for next year, we want an opportunity for our students to be able to review their questions and answers and change an answer if they would like to.
I mean, I don't.
How many schools are at 60? Do you know? Can you get that
We'll
far?
have
Can you get that
There
far?
were
How many
quite a
schools were at
few.
60?
I'd say quite a few. It was all over the place, and it wasn't just at 60. Somewhere there was just a wide range and a wide variation. There was no consistency anywhere from elementary to the middle schools to areas in the district.
And
It was
parents
all
do
over.
question that, because I know our department got some phone calls last year saying, well, my child was at this school and they scored a 60 and they got points, and now they're at this school and they made a 70, and so parents were questioning why the percentage for them to get points was different from school to school.
Ms. Reynolds?
I'll say, I think I have a little bit of a unique position because I grew up with AR, and it successfully killed my love for reading in elementary school, to the point that I purposefully failed my STAR test going into 5th grade so I could read the easier books because I knew that was the connection. So I think that it does affect kids.
It does.
I still clearly am traumatized by AR. I don't agree with it at all.
And it shouldn't be that way. It should be
No.
something that
Right.
children love to
They
do.
love.
And we have to figure that out. Somehow we have to figure that out. I don't know what the answer is, but we gotta have to figure that out. That's the core. You
do.
want to keep them reading,
Yes.
just like we want to keep them doing math.
Yes.
You know, not making it hard for them. So, I don't know what the answer is, but
Yeah.
Well, I have traumatized my share of children with AR. Because we did it at Jewett, we did it as a school. And so it wasn't just
It
like
only
the
got
reading
worse.
teacher or the media, we did it, we had AR time, period. And, but,
And-
do we still do reading logs? And is that district-wide?
No.
That is one of the strategies we talked to them about how to, try to, progress monitor whether they're moving their, levels up or what they're reading. So we encourage that in some situations, but it's not required.
Is there some way we can get the same, like, data without having the experience? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Like, we can collect the data in the background, just don't hit a kid across the face with a board, I
Can we
don't.
bring this back at a later?
Yeah.
This
we-
requires so much conversation that.
I think we actually have two items. This
crazy.
item, as well as the IRIS progress update that we'll move to our
We'll
next.
move to that to the
Yes.
next agenda.
Yeah, let's
That's our next agenda.
We do not have
And
time.
unless we have any pressing board comments, we'll move on to discipline.
Okay.